America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. And can we get a roll call?
Councilmember Agrimonti. Here. Councilmember Cook.
Here.
Councilmember Hundley.
Here.
Vice Mayor Harvey.
Present.
Mayor Harrington.
Present.
Thank you.
Great. We are going to have a closed session at the end of this meeting, so there's no report at this time. And can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Motion to approve.
Second.
Roll call.
Councilmember Agrimonti. Aye. Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harvey.
Yes.
Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
Great. At this time, we'll move on to comments from the public. Members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Under state law, unless otherwise permitted under the Ralph M. Brown Act, the merits of the matters presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the City Council at this time. For items appearing on the agenda, the public will be invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for council consideration. Upon being acknowledged, please step to the podium and speak into the microphone and begin by stating and spelling your name and giving your address. Thank you very much. Ken.
Thank you. Ken Brown, 1396 Lubeck Street in the beautiful city of Sonoma. I want to start by saying thank you to Wendy Atkins from the Planning Department. She has been very responsive to our neighbors near the lodge. With the lodge undergoing many projects, this is a very good opportunity to take to address some of the issues of the past. Uncovered garbage, large truck U-turns, random parking. I live in that neighborhood, and it affects me every single day. The lodge is a good supplier of TOT money, I understand that. But they have to play by the rules, as we all do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken.
Good evening, Council. David Morrell, 483 Mall Court here in Sonoma. I'm here tonight as an individual citizen rather than as the chair of the board of the Sonoma Ecology Center or a member of the Commission on Community Services and Environmental Quality. My presentation reflects my personal opinion, has not been discussed or shared with members of either of those groups. My environmental credentials, I think, are clear to the council members after 50 years of active service in environmental management. I'm here to talk about UGB, urban growth boundaries. Fundamentally,
that's
I
an
support
item
them.
on the agenda tonight, so if you want to address the UGB, you're going to have to wait until it's called. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be back.
Okay, good. Looking forward to it.
Hi, my name is Paul Rocket. I live at 781 Ernest Drive in North Sonoma. And I come to talk to you today to ask a question of you. I live in the area bounded by US 12, by Verano, going up to Michael Drive. It's your nearest neighbor, just across Verano. And in 2012, a significant part of our neighborhood, about 120 homes, was essentially kidnapped and placed into the Spring Specific Plan, which we didn't learn about in the neighborhood until 2018, 6 years later. That shouldn't happen to any neighborhood around here. And it's happened to us, and we're spending a lot of time trying to undo that situation. And so I have a simple request, and that is I implore the city of Sonoma, as you consider in the general plan that's coming up, that you consider including us at least at the level of a sphere of influence within the zoning that might be proposed.
So
for the county.
I'm also going to have to let you know that if you want to talk about the general plan update or the UGB, you can comment when that matter is called. And this is for all matters not on the agenda tonight. And I look forward to hearing your comments, and I hope you stay, but it's only for unagendized matters at this time.
So during that time, there will be a public comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Hello, my name is Stacy Scott. I live at 387 Denmark. I wanted to talk about a full annexation that the county.
And I'm also going to have to ask you to bring that up at the time that we have public comment on the general plan update and
Okay.
the UGB.
Sounds good.
Hi, my name is Shelley Masters. I live at 336 Banchero Street. And during the last, I'm talking about the cell towers, during the last Planning Commission meeting, one of the towers was considered to be possibly moved to closer to my home. And
Ms. Masters, could you just pull that microphone down?
okay, one of the cell towers was to be moved possibly closer to my home, and I've just been quite anxious about it. So I wanted to formally say thank you to David. I called David Storer, and he called me right back, and we had a wonderful conversation. And I mean, I'm emotional about this. But what I wanted to say is that 5G, we're not allowed to talk about the health effects, but these cell towers are going to be closer and closer and closer to us. And there is no gap in coverage. I thought that our analysts, the tech analysts, had already covered that there's no gap in coverage. And as a citizen, I don't know, I don't have the machine, the $100,000 meter to tell, where the gaps are and what. And I'm really curious why this is even going to design, that it should be a done deal right now if we don't have a gap in coverage. So as a citizen, I'd like to know about that process. Where is the gap? And also, the Sun wrote a wonderful article, and I want to put this into the public record. I printed it out. It's in the Sun issue about the design meeting, and I also want to put in this is a chart of health effects of living close to cell towers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Ann Colachidas, Colichidas, 14 Hacienda in Sonoma. Hi, good evening. I want to take this opportunity to bring it to the public's attention and also the council as a little project I've been working on, which is trying to find out how the homeowners in mobile home parks are going to get notified of the power shutoff if it happens this year, which from what I understand, the talks that I've been to and also people I've talked to, that might not be till like October or November that we're really at risk of having a power shutoff. But in the meantime, we're in 2 of the 3 parks, because Moon Valley had PG&E come in and redo all the PG&E, so they're now direct customers. But typically in California, we're all sub-metered. And according to PG&E and everything I found out, they're saying that we are not going to get any kind of notification for this power shutoff. And it just doesn't make sense. We're not second-class citizens. And also, what does it take for them to take our phone numbers and robocall us just like they're going to call everybody else? I just don't get it. So anyway, I just want to bring this to your attention. We have some time to work on it. I've been in contact with Senator Dodd's office and those people, and they've been contacting. It's a big circular thing that's going on right now, but I hope to break through it. But I appreciate it if you keep it on your radar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Okay. My name is Richard Silver, 95 Bernhardt Avenue, Fetters Hot Springs. Haven't been here in a while, so greetings and salutations. I hope you all had a relaxing and beneficial summer holiday. In deference to our learned counsel, who always looks forward to what I will say extemporaneously, tonight I'm going to read something. And here I go. On the 20th of July, I sent to all of you assembled here, except for, I believe, our valuable clerk, an email where I respectfully request you consider the following: to place on the calendar of the City Council prior to the Planning Department meeting scheduled for September 12, that you suspend all hearings, meetings, and determinations regarding the use permit application of Verizon Wireless, care of CBR Group, to allow a wireless telecommunications facility on the existing pole at West 5th Street, application site 006. pursuant to Section 15303 of the state CEQA guidelines, the conversion of existing small structures from one use to another Class 3. Until the determination of Senate bill sponsored by Senators Feinstein, Harris, Schumer, Blumenthal, Cardin, Wyden, and Bennett, S2012, which has been filed on June 27 of this year and been referred to the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, and H.R. Bill 530, sponsored by Representative Esho and co-sponsored by a woman whose name I forget from San Mateo. And I'm going to read that one because it's important. This act may be cited as accelerating broadband development by empowering local companies Act of 2019. Actions by the Federal Communications Commission in accelerating wireless and wireline broadband deployment for removing barriers to infrastructure investment, and the Federal Communications declaratory ruling in the third report and order declaratory shall have no force or effect. In part, what I'm asking is that you decide not to make a decision pending these two bills and give all of us a chance to understand what's really involved, both for yourselves individually and your homes, your families, and this community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to make comments on items that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, I will close public comment, and we had two questions. One, which I will just leave to the city manager, about working with PG&E regarding contact in the mobile home parks, and the other regarding the cell phones going to design review.
Yeah, so in terms of the mobile homes, as the speaker mentioned, a lot of mobile home parks are master metered. So there are a variety of conversations that we are having with PG&E, and they have a list of kind of who some of their, whether it's folks that are kind of fragile customers that may need medical equipment for electricity, et cetera. So they are trying a variety of ways to do some of this more specific reach out. I will be happy to ask this question specifically of our representative. I've not heard this, this kind of the answer to this raised, but I understand exactly the concern and happy to ask and see if we can find anything or be another point of pressure potentially. So that's the answer to that one. In terms of the question of the council choosing to not take any action on
I think it was a
sorry.
different question. The question was, probably for David Storr, about the cell phone tower matter being referred to design review. I don't know if you had a quick comment.
We currently have 3 applications, not just the one that was referenced. We have a 006, 007, and a 012. They went to the Planning Commission on July the 11th, and this legislation appears to have been submitted after that date. And those are on a course individually as applications that will be coming before the Commission on September the 12th. With respect to the second bill that was referenced, your council did authorize you as mayor to respond to the SU legislation in support of it.
Thank you very much. Okay, and with that, we will move on from public comment. Are there any dedications for this meeting?
I do.
Logan? Vice Mayor Harvey?
I'd like to dedicate this meeting to a young woman and a member of the Sonoma community who I knew for a long time, was a family friend of my family's, and she tragically passed away at the age of 27. Whole life ahead of her, was about to start a new career with airlines and being a stewardess there, and her name's Haley Barker. Really, really wonderful young woman who lost her life. So I'd dedicate this meeting to her.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Councilmember Cook?
I just want to have a moment of silence for the city of Gilroy and everybody in California about what happened yesterday.
That sounds right. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? All right. With that, we will move on to presentations. Item 3.1, recognition of Officer Jeff Sherman and Canine Officer Dickie on the occasion of Dickie's retirement. And I will turn it over to the city manager for introduction. You can come up if it's...
Great, come on up. I'd like to also introduce Police Chief Orlando Rodriguez. And welcome Officer Sherman and Dickie. Yay. So... I will let Orlando kind of introduce and talk a little bit about Dickie, and then we have a presentation to thank him for his service.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council, City Manager, members of the public. Thank you for having us up here. Again, back in 2013, Dickie and Deputy Sherman began their time as Sonoma Police Department's Canine team. Dickie is a beautiful 8-year-old Belgian Malinois German Shepherd mix that is cross-trained in narcotics detention and patrol operations. Deputy Jeff Sherman and his partner Dickie have been such a valuable asset to their department and especially our community. Our canine Dickie has by far been the most popular crime fighter
That's
ever.
true, yeah.
I don't think this is working, but just. All right. So he's been loved by everybody in this community. I don't think there's not a person that doesn't like this guy. Over the years, our canine team has had 193 patrol-related deployments that have resulted in 50 suspect surrenders or apprehensions, reducing law enforcement and suspect injuries and liability. They have also had 109 narcotic-related deployments that have resulted in the discovery of drugs illegally possessed, firearms, and cash, which some of that cash came directly to the city of Sonoma, which is going to be used to replace Dickie, so he kind of paid for himself. Good job, Dickie. Can move to the next one. Deputy Sherman and Dickie have completed over 1,200 hours of training, including the annual California Narcotics Canine Association Conference. Our canine team has also been a huge part of our community. Dickie has been Pet of the Month at the Pet Food Express. Deputy Sherman and Dickie have been part of multiple senior projects at Sonoma Valley High School. Dickie has been featured in the Valley of the Moon magazine, along with countless other appearances all over the valley. I don't think there's not one place he didn't show up, right, Jeff? No. We are sad to see this canine team come to an end of a career for Dickie, not for Jeff. He still has many years left. But we are thankful for everything they have provided to the city of Sonoma, our entire valley. Dickie, enjoy your retirement. Congratulations. Dickie will continue to work until a new selection has been made. And then at that point, will officially be off the streets. And I'll leave this up to Jeff if he has some words he wants to say.
I just wanted to thank the city for giving us the opportunity. The canine position is by far the best position in law enforcement. Every handler is going to agree with me on that. Chief Sackett, want to appreciate Chief Sackett getting the program going and the city approving it. And then Chief Rodriguez for continuing it. Past handler himself. So the dog's a big asset to the city. Keeps everybody safe, from all of our partners to the community members to the bad guys. Most people want to give up whenever they see the dog. So that's a win-win for everybody. That's the whole goal of using the dog. So just want to say thank you.
Wonderful. And I have some certificates for the both of you. Some people may not know that Officer Sherman is going to take this dog home, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So this is your new family member.
And we are community members as well, too. So.
Oh, wonderful.
Do we live in here?
So first of all, we have this collar. And then we have a certificate of honor for Dickie. And then also one for you.
A little inscription on it.
Mayor Harrington, can we have the full, maybe the full council and even past Chief Brett Sackett come? And then, if you wouldn't, Deputy Sherman, would you mind reading off what the caller says?
The caller on here, yeah.
Yeah, his new caller.
This is Dickie, City of Sonoma, first Canine, 2013 to 2019.
Go stand in the back. Go.
Just stand in the back.
Gotta make sure I get the dog in. All right, 1, 2, 3. Madeline, can you scooch around? I can't see you. Okay. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you all.
I want to thank you very much for your support again. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that was nice. Now on to item 4, the consent calendar. All items listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. At this time, council may decide to change the order of the agenda. Are there any council comments on the consent calendar?
Mayor, I actually wish that Chief would stay here because I wanted to pull 4.2.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? No? I will open up for public comment the consent calendar, item 4.1, 2, 3, and 3. Are there any members of the public that wish to make comment on these items? Seeing none, I will close public comment, and we perhaps can have a motion on items 4.1 and 4.3.
Move to approve the consent calendar excluding item 4.2.
Second.
Oh, sorry.
Ooh, race.
I defer.
I yield.
Roll call.
Councilmember Agrimonti.
Aye.
Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley.
Oh, one moment, please.
Those 4.1 and 4.3, right?
Yeah.
That's part of consent?
Yeah.
Wait, what is the motion?
That's part of regular calendar. That's 6.2.
Yeah, 4.3. We're on consent calendar. 4.3 is a subdivision agreement located over by
okay.
Sonoma Market.
So should I leave?
If you would, yeah.
Okay.
Make a disclosure
I have
on
to
it.
recuse.
This is your choice. Jeff, do you want to?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. I'm doing a lot of recusing tonight.
Because this item's on the consent calendar, all you need to do is identify your conflict, but you can stay there and abstain.
Okay. So I guess should we go down these individually then, since it's all kind of tossed up now?
Because he made the motion to approve the entire consent calendar.
Yeah. So let's.
Can you withdraw your
Yeah,
motion?
once
I
you
withdraw my motion.
Withdraw your
and
motion,
we'll
have somebody
make a
else
new one.
make the motion.
I would like to make a motion to approve items 4.1 and 4.3 on the consent calendar.
Second?
Can we get a roll call, please? Oh, wait, let's do it separate, one by one, because he has to recuse on 4.3. So can you just do 4.1 first and then 4.3?
Well, I think when he gets to his vote, he can say he's only voting for.
Okay.
You could do
I
that.
don't know.
Either way,
Madam Clerk, could you just do the roll call on 4.1 first and then 4.3, please?
Sure. For 4.1, Councilmember Agrimonti.
Aye.
Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harvey.
Yes.
Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Then on item 4.3, Councilmember Agrimonti.
Aye.
Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harvey.
Abstain.
And Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries 401.
And then is it necessary to say the conflict?
yes, you should describe why you're abstaining.
Yeah, I'm abstaining from voting on item 4.3 because I live within 500 feet of the subject matter subdivision, so I must recuse myself.
It's close enough.
Close enough? I don't know.
I liked it. I thought it was great. City manager, item 4.2.
So item 4.2, this is basically staff's recommendation to set aside, to use the funding to replace the dog that we just talked about. So the item basically, we have been setting aside asset forfeiture funding. There's a little over $18,000 in that fund. The plan had been from the very beginning that at a point you need a new dog, which is somewhere between maybe 6 to 8 years to have those funds build and then be able to use that to replace the dog. So the dog is about $15,000 is what we'll be using for both to purchase a new dog and for training for the new handler. And so that the action in front of council is to approve purchase of a new canine, provide the training, budget amendment, and authorize the city manager to execute any agreements. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any council questions on this matter?
I had questions. That's why I pulled it. The reason I pulled it is, first of all, I don't know if people here understand what the seizure fund is all about. It's very important. I think it was passed for police departments many years ago. But because we contract with the sheriff's department, my question is, does the money go to the sheriff's department and then we make a request for it to come back to us? That's really my question. Or does it sit in our general, in our budget?
Mm-hmm. So here's the way the process works. Since the sheriff's department, we contract with them for law enforcement, they are in charge of taking all the evidence. So they take and hold all the evidence. They go through the asset seizure process, and if there are assets that are sold, then then a piece, I'm not sure how much, because to deal with that cost piece, they take care of some of that. And then the funds comes back to the city every year. And so then we get, or when there's a transfer. And so that we have a special fund sitting within the city's budget, within our coffers, which is total about $18,000, which is what has been accrued over the past about 8 years.
So I just really, I feel it's important for the public to know exactly what the seizure funds are all about. And, you know, there have been some issues, of course, over the decades regarding seizure funds, and it's very important that we actually make sure that every penny matches every expenditure. So, so I'm really pleased that we're doing this, but I just wanted the public to know what the seizure fund is all about. Thank you.
Are there any other council questions? Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back for council comments or a vote.
Move to approve 4.2.
Second.
Can we get a roll call?
Councilmember Agrimonti?
Aye.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harvey?
Yes.
Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
And with that, we will move on to item 6.1. We are holding a study session on the city's general plan, housing element, development code, and urban growth boundary for the purposes of education and initial information. And I will turn it over to our planning director
I'll open
or
just
city manager, planning director, one of our wonderful
Okay.
staff.
Thank you, Mayor Harrington. So just a few highlights. We have, so we're excited to be here tonight and to begin a conversation that I think the community and council members have been wanting to have for some time. And that is to talk about our general plan, to talk about our development code, talk about our housing element, which is part of our general plan, but has a lot more requirements for us and some time sensitivities. And then also talk about the urban growth boundary as well. So the purpose of tonight really is kind of an Education 101 session. This is a kickoff meeting. We're not coming with kind of a formal recommendation, formal process, timeline, all of that worked out. We don't do, as a community, we don't update these things very often. And the laws do change. And so we really felt like it was important to do kind of an education landscape, make sure everyone's got consistent information. And then we can come back shortly and then talk about kind of next steps, et cetera. So there was background in
Can
your...
I just announce for the public what the procedure is for public comment?
Yes.
So we're going to receive a report from staff After that time, there will be council member questions. After council member questions, there will be comments from the public. You will have 3 minutes each, and you can line up at the time of public comment to make your comments. Anybody who asks a question during that time, your questions will all be written down, and the questions will be answered all together at the end of public comment. We'll go through them all, so they won't be answered directly when you ask them, but at the end of public comment, and then it will be brought back to the council for discussion. So that's the process.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. No, it's okay. You went to the end game, which is just fine. So again, the purpose is education and background. And so we're going to focus on the general plan. We're going to kind of talk about some terminology and tools. And we're going to outline the current general plan, the elements, and some information that's needed for some future updates. Some of our elements we've updated more recently are in good shape. We also, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about housing, and in particular, we will have requirements from the state of California for our regional housing need allocation. Those numbers will be coming out sometime this next spring, and so that process, we will need to update our housing element, and we will need to find specific locations for those affordable housing requirements. There's also some state grant money to help us streamline housing, and David will talk to you more about that. And then we're going to do an overview of the city's boundaries, our city limit lines, sphere of influence, talk about what they each mean and why, and then talk more specifically about the urban growth boundary. So, just a little quote here. By far the greatest and most admirable form of wisdom is that needed to plan and beautify cities and human communities. And that's really what this is how do we keep the community that we know and love, and plan for that and be strategic and thoughtful. And so and we've been doing this for some time, so I'm going to turn it to David, who is going to give you a bit of history, and then we will launch in.
Thank you, Kathy. Council members, Mayor Harrington. The words exciting and city planning are generally not used in the same sentence, but for me, forgive me, but I'll move along. And for the public's benefit tonight, this PowerPoint will be on our website. So if you don't have a copy or would like a copy, you know where to find it. So going back to in our history, you'll see that we've been able to provide the covers of all of the general plans. Thank you to one of our planning commissioners that had a few squirreled away. And you can see that the general plan first became a tool in California in the early 1960s, and it's evolved over time. And these general plans that you see out there today in our communities are basically blueprints or constitutions of each jurisdiction. And as you can see, the tools that are available to us planners, the general plan is in the hierarchy, it's the top dog, so to speak. And you can see there, nestled between zoning and the general plan, is a tool called a specific plan, which many communities use. I'm not aware that Sonoma has used one in the past. We may have done so. We certainly have done overlay zones, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But a specific plan is generally a document that is wedged between general plans and zoning tools. And it's really for a specific piece of geography, and it may not necessarily have to be contiguous, but certainly a coordinated plan. And many developments, large developments that you see in some communities, they'll have an implementation plan for financing and coordination of infrastructure. And certainly it becomes the zoning of that particular piece of property, but it's nestled right there between a general plan and zoning. We're all familiar with zoning. We know about zoning districts. We all live in one. Our zoning code or development code is really an integrated development set of rules and guidelines. And it has been amended from time to time, but most recently comprehensively in 2002. So we're basically at an almost 20-year development tool, and from what I've learned in the past year is that it's in need of some fixes. We've certainly seen that at the Planning Commission, and we are certainly seeing a lot of appeals that kind of go along with the applications that come as a result of the implementation of our zoning code. We've also got a tool there called CEQA that originated in the early 1970s that has been amended from time to time. I won't read, by the way, every line item on each of these slides. But with respect to CEQA, before you can approve a discretionary project, there has to be some form of environmental determination. This is not just unique to Sonoma, it's a statewide provision that we have. And I've listed a few of the different types of documents that may result as a review of discretionary approval. So for each conditional use permit, even a sign review, a PD, a variance, we need to go through an environmental review. Another tool that doesn't get talked about much but is in our development code is the State Subdivision Map Act, or our own subdivision regulations that mirror the State Subdivision Map Act. This act has been in place since the early 1900s, but has taken more of a front page view, if you will, in the last 30, 40 years with respect to the division of lands for sale, lease, and financing. So going to the general plan, again, our constitution for the city of Sonoma, it is required by state law. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a picture of our vision, a blueprint for our future, and it basically is the framework from which all of our zoning tools are supposed to be directed towards. In other words, you need to be consistent in your zoning with respect to your general plan document. Now, I do want to point out that a general plan is composed of two things. Number one is the policy document of the framework, and then a map. And you may recall in some of your staff reports, you see staff parse out the difference between a general plan designation and a zoning district. And that's done for a very specific purpose, because we do have to be consistent amongst those documents. General plans consist of a required 7 elements, and on my next slide I'll show you what those elements are. The good news is that you're not limited to just those 7. You can create optional elements. Some communities are required to have 9, depending on the geography and the type of communities that they have surrounding them, like a disadvantaged community. We also have a 20-year time frame on most general plans, and if you recall going back to the first slide or second slide or so, in Sonoma it's been done almost every 10 years. Most communities, for example the county of Sonoma, they are in the process of updating a general plan until 2040, and that's going to be a 6 to 7 year plan of attack, so to speak. So generally speaking, they are a 20-year timeline. Our next general plan could be a document going from its present date, 2020, until 2035, 2040, or whatever vision the city council and community has. We are currently on an 8-year cycle. The city has opted into that particular cycle, as opposed to a 5-year cycle that you'll see mostly up and down the state of California. The 8-year cycle takes us to 2023.
Can you go back to that? Sorry, I just want to be clear. There, we're talking about the housing element for folks, not the general plan. So you end up having to redo your housing element more often than you do your general plan, and that's fine. But that is and that's the situation we're going to be in here as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. And there is a mandatory requirement to have your housing element done every 5 years, and the cycle that we're on has already started, so to speak, with respect to getting numbers from HCD, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, with respect to the allocation that we're going to get that we must embody within the housing element, which again has to be consistent with other elements of our general plan. So here are the 7 elements of our general plan. Very simply, they have been in most of your general plans going back to 1964, except for an optional element, which is the tourism element in the first general plan that you had something like that discussed versus having an economic development element. We've had something of that nature for the last 3 general plans, and I would expect that to be in our future update. This is just a very typical flow chart showing you the process, some of the steps that you can have. Certainly some last longer than others, but at the end of the day, as I mentioned previously, there will be a requirement to do a CEQA review, which for the most part, especially if it includes zoning designations and general plan designations being coordinated, will require typically an NEIR would be involved. Housing elements, on the contrary, may even have a negative declaration or mitigating neg dec, depending on the timing of it related to the rest of the actions.
Can I ask a quick question? Is there a time to review, like, basically the success or failure of the prior general plan and how much progress we made on that, and where in this flow chart would that fit in?
So not so much in this particular chart, but in the preparation of your housing element, there is a requirement to review. HCD is very interested in seeing how successful or not a jurisdiction has been in its implementation measures, and a little bit later I'll have a chart in here that tells you how many implementation measures we have in addition that are all derivative of the goals and the policies. And clearly there's no state requirement to do so other than reporting on an annual basis the success of your general plan, which has taken the form of the housing element in Sonoma's case. And we've done it for the last 3 years. in a comprehensive manner, mostly focusing on the housing element.
So my experience, Harrington, is typically one of the first things you do is to really go through and say, all right, here are our goals, here's our policies, here's our implementing actions. Did we meet them? Partially, yes, no, completed. Then then part of the conversations you're moving forward is, are there any of these that maybe weren't done, were completely done? Are they still important? Do you want to continue?
Right.
Or maybe they were at a point in time and they're not necessary anymore. So that is definitely one of kind of the first kind of data and conditions that is done.
Thanks.
So again, thank you. So you can see here that there's a process in which we can do community outreach and engagement, involving the public and helping the Planning Commission and yourselves actually get to have public hearings and adopt a form of a general plan update. And typically these things can take anywhere between 2 to 5 years. As I mentioned previously, 6 to 7 years is the plan for the County of Sonoma in updating its general plan.
And I think, can you back up for just for a second, David? So one of the things that staff has been working on, as council knows, is to really improve our tools. So between the updated website and our social media, part of the whole impetus of that was so we would be ready, because we've got to have a good communication framework in order to be engaging and talking with the public. There also are special online engagement tools that some of these general plan consultants can use or cities can purchase to make it easy, because not everyone can come down to a public meeting. So how do you reach a broad audience? So we're actually an interesting time with some of the new technologies, some different ways to create community conversations that didn't really exist 5 or 6 years ago.
And would you mind just briefly giving a little bit more information about typically the role of the Planning Commission in a general plan update and the role of the City Council?
Sure. As a legislative body, you have appointed the Planning Commission to assist as an advisory capacity when it comes to land use matters. And those tasks under the state enabling legislation allow you to divest your land use component to the Planning Commission such that you would hear certain matters upon appeal. In the case of the City of Sonoma, your Planning Commission would be an advisory body, so any kind of general plan process would go to them first, and they would provide a recommendation to your council. But before it gets to the Planning Commission, there'll be community workshops and a series of engagements that we will conduct, similar to the ones that we had on the housing town halls.
Thanks.
And so I think also there is typically we have a combined conservation, open space, environmental element, and that is a place that your CSCC may be your lead on reviewing. So, there can be different roles for different parts, different types of your commissions to look at, and your commissions, I think, because they do have a knowledge of what your current rules are and things maybe that have worked well or not, they can really be a very helpful lens and voice to help you go through it. So when it comes to the council, there's been some pre-vetting.
Great.
I'd also suggest to add to Kathy, and that would be if there was a desire to amend the development code, the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission would be also another good one, because there's a significant component of those guidelines within your development code that they deal with on a monthly basis.
Oh, okay.
Our current vision statement, adopted by the City Council in 2006, is before you here, and this is basically apple pie and Chevrolet, so to speak, or a Chevrolet or Kia, whichever car of your choice. The point being is this is very typical kind of stuff that you'll see, and I've seen it in all of your general plans to date, variation on the same theme. That Sonoma is a great place to live, and it's a very desirable place within Northern California. And what I've just done is blanked it all out. There we go. As I mentioned, part of that vision, as a result of that vision, we certainly have a lot of goals, policies, and implementation measures to think about, going along the lines that Kathy spoke about. You have there the 6 elements or chapters, as they're called in our general plan today, and then the housing element. So as Kathy mentioned, the housing element has to be reviewed and updated on a periodic basis. So we've had one cycle, if you will, during our general plan timeline since 2006 in which to update the housing element. And in 2015, again for an 8-year cycle, matching along with the RENA process, and I'll get to that later, you can see that there's quite a few goals and policies and implementation measures. One that we'll speak to tonight is in the land use element, if you will, on Chapter 1, will be the issue of the urban growth boundary, which is one of those 39 implementation measures.
David, just go back for a minute. I think one thing as we really start this process and go through it, there's definitely a balancing act between, you're doing a 20-year horizon and having enough implementation measures and policies, but not having so much that it's like you may not be able to be successful because it's just too much. So I think when we look at this, we'll want to be careful and just really understand what's the goals, what is council really trying to get accomplished here, and make sure that we have a good amount that can be accomplished over that time period.
Yeah, I haven't really sat down and done the math, but if there's 176 implementation measures and they all take 6 months on average to do, you basically use your runway, so to speak, as far as trying to get those all done. And I think the value of having a check-in as to seeing how well we are doing would be a great opportunity for the city staff to see how we're going for the last few years that is still in the general plan, that is still left, to do that very thing of trying to figure out what would be good to wrap over into the next general plan. The circulation element, as you see under Chapter 4, was modified in 2016, and arguably, as you'll see in a few minutes, there needs to be an update to that too, and I'll get to the reasons for that. So again, in the state mandated elements, you'll see there on the left-hand side, the City of Sonoma has divided open space and conservation into one element, and there's an argument to have them separated out, and I'll get to that in a few minutes as well. As you can see also, the emphasis of the city in 2006 was to perhaps make prominent the analysis related to the local economy as a second chapter, if you will, of the general plan, to bring the focus to that and recognizing its importance. Again, that would be an optional element. With respect to providing analysis, the Sonoma County Economic Development Board and the Sonoma Valley Chamber, even last year, provided a report on the city's profile and demography, and that will be something that will be important or valuable to update it in a general plan element update, such as the one that we're talking about. Again, the analysis that we have and the data that we have goes back to the early 2000s. Again, we're 20 years old in that respect, and I think it could use a little bit of a freshen up.
And if council recalls, this is something that we've talked about, is doing kind of an economic development assessment or strategic plan. And by having that information ahead of time, it kind of provides your data and you have a current profile and picture that then you're using that information as you write your local economy or your economic development element. So it's it can be some homework if council has interest in having that element.
With respect to the environmental resources, you can see that there's actually two components. One, a conservation element that can talk about climate action, threatened and endangered species, and then the second one being open space. Some people put that together with their park planning and things like that.
I thought, and I could be wrong, but aren't air quality and environmental justice new items that are required? I didn't see those aren't there 9 now?
No, there's 7. It's still 7, but those are under certain conditions. And one is environmental justice, and the other one is disadvantaged communities, and that particular kind of analysis that goes in. We don't have one of those communities nearby.
The air quality is not part of it.
Air quality is for San Joaquin County, and that area it's required. It's not required everywhere.
Oh,
correct.
Thanks.
But certainly nothing would prevent us from including those as optional elements. So with respect to our circulation element, we, as I mentioned just previously, and I'll do so in passing, most general plans up until probably the last year have included an analysis called level of service. It's been the mainstay of most traffic analysis. With respect to the adoption almost 6 years ago, VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, is the metric, and the city of Sonoma, along with other cities and counties up and down the state, will need to adopt our own thresholds for the purposes of CEQA before July of next year. I'm not quite sure what the penalty will be should we not do that. I'm sure legal counsel can advise us that we'll be doing that. We're certainly watching what's going on. Just as a couple of weeks ago, I attended an SB 743 training session, if you will. They're coming fast and furious in the planning world and in the traffic engineering world. We will be needing to update our general plan to include those new thresholds. In light of the recent statewide and local wildfires, there's also a need to talk about public safety as we do an update of our safety element. With respect to housing, Kathy mentioned this. I'll probably spend more time on this, primarily because there's a slew of legislation that's going through right now affecting how the state of California increases production and preservation of housing. As I mentioned earlier, our housing element was updated in 2015 for an 8-year bandwidth, and our next time is December of 2022, as opposed to other jurisdictions. For example, SACOG, they're on a different cycle, and theirs will be coming slightly 2 or 3 years before us. So it's kind of interesting to see what HCD is doing with respect to creating regional housing need determinations for a council of governments. So if I can just kind of break it down for a minute, California is divided into councils of governments, and within a council of governments, perhaps like SACOG, for example, they have 29 member jurisdictions. As far as ABAG is concerned, pardon me?
People don't know what SACOG
Oh, I'm sorry. The Sacramento Area Council of Governments. There's MBAG, Monterey Bay Area of Governments. There's SANDAG, the San Diego Council of Governments. The state of California is divided up into a lot of council of governments. We're ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments. Other jurisdictions and councils of governments are on different cycles. One, SACOG, is before us, so it's interesting to see what's going on there and how that process is playing out with respect to how the state of California gives to these councils of governments their determination. It's then up to the council of governments to then say, Sonoma, you get this many, and that's your allocation. Sebastopol, here's your regional housing needs allocation, all derivative of that number that comes from the state and then gets parsed out by the council of governments, in this case, ABAG. Sorry for that. So this slide basically tries to talk about that.
I apologize, could I go back to vehicle miles traveled?
Sure.
And also the governor's bill 743. When I was on the Transportation Authority, it was found that people in Sonoma and the Valley travel more than anyone else in this county because we have no mass transit. So when we are sort of told that this is, we are not doing our role, that we're not providing the role that we should have, it's not our fault. We just don't have mass transit, and those things are really an important part of cutting this down. So it's, I think I want to defend the city of Sonoma and other cities, because we really are lacking in mass transit here, which is a shame. So when the governor does SB 743, they don't take into consideration areas like ours who do not have good transportation systems. So I think people should know that.
And I think to go along with that point, Councilmember Agrimonti, the only jurisdictions that I'm aware of that have actually adopted VMT right now are those larger jurisdictions like in Oakland that have mass transit. They can figure out what the metrics are. Smaller communities like ours are going to have a hard time trying to do the math.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because a lot of what's going on really with this legislation for housing, the unfortunate thing is we are very small. And they're only giving some benefits to cities with mass transit. And what's our mass transit? Maybe 12 people at a bus stop? I think they should lower it for smaller cities. So I just want people to understand we're not bad people, we just don't have services for us. Thank you.
So getting back to the cycle, thank you for that. For the housing update process, we will need to have a new housing element by December of 2022. And between now and that time, I believe there's an 18-month period of time in which we must have that adopted from the time that the regional housing needs determination has been given to the Council of Governments. And the Council of Governments has started a process now to engage the city of Sonoma and other counties in the area, in the Sonoma Valley. With respect to a new process, the last bullet point here is there is a process for neighboring jurisdictions to form a sub-region for it, should you want to participate, for that group to divide, if you will, or subdivide out the regional housing allocation for that particular community. So, for example, maybe Sebastopol and the city of Sonoma want to join together to form a sub-region. I don't know why it would be those two pieces of communities. You don't have to opt in. You don't have to do it. It's a process. I'm not quite sure what the advantages are. It's relatively new, a process. But we do need to, if we want to do that and join up with another jurisdiction, let the ABAG know about it by February the 1st. So that process is being flushed out at the moment as we speak.
Does it have to be an incorporated area?
No, it doesn't. The numbers are given to the region through the Council of Governments, and it will include Sonoma County. In fact, in talking with the county, they are interested in taking the lead on that process to kind of get everybody coordinated.
Councilmember Hundley?
So is that something that's voluntary in our regard? Like,
Yes,
can
it is.
someone just stick us in someone, or we'd have to agree to it?
No, it's voluntary. We don't have to participate.
And so is this going to be like, this is brand new, these subregions?
With one or two,
Would a
yeah, I
county
think
do something like this if the city's in a county or county in a city, or?
it could be
We'll figure it out.
every agency in Sonoma County except for us if we chose.
Right, or we could decide that maybe us in the incorporated area of Sonoma Valley are the only folks that are interested in a
Right.
subregion. We don't know enough, but it's kind of an intriguing concept just because of the connections that exist for us in terms of housing with the valley. So, I think we need to understand what this looks like more, but we didn't want to surprise you on it in 60 days and tell you. So it's kind of like, we need to kind of peel back this onion and learn more, but we think we want to spend a little time on that one.
Seems like something we've talked about a lot of times, which is that since it is one community socially and economically in many ways, that you can't just draw a line right at the border about where all the housing is. So it's interesting.
So would this allow, I mean, it says here we're conducting our own RENA process to allocate the subregion's housing need. So would we be coming up with our own RENA numbers, or would those still come from ABAG?
We get the ABAG number, and then it's up to the subregion once it gets its number on how to parse that out through the member agencies that are part of that subregion.
Okay, so they'd look at us instead of right now, they give the city of Sonoma a certain allocation of housing, they would give that subregion a certain allocation of housing, and then we'd split it up amongst ourselves.
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, versus now what's happening with the counties kind of splitting it up itself.
I will tell you that
Interesting.
that HCD looks at subregions a little bit differently, perhaps with a bigger magnifying glass because they want to understand the methodology in which was used to create that assignment. So again, I'm only familiar with about a half a dozen throughout the state that have actually used this process. But it's coming.
Councilmember Hundley and then Councilmember Cook.
Do you have any indication as to like what the numbers are going to look like? Are they going to be the same, or do you think they're probably going to go up?
Luckily, because I talked about SACOG just a few minutes ago, there's a 46% higher from the state at the present moment for that particular COG. So I expect our numbers not necessarily to be straight 46%. I've actually predicted a doubling of our number of 137 in the next cycle.
Interesting. Councilmember Cook?
Yeah, that process you were talking about, were jurisdictions. Who would have to vote on that? Would that be the Board of Supervisors and the City Council, or does that go to a regular vote of the people?
You don't get any participation at all. You get given the numbers and you go play with it. I hate to say it quite as coarse as that, but the allocation is
Oh, no,
is
not
cha-
the
it's
allocation.
challengeable.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry.
The
Subregion.
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 Let's say that we did want to carve out Sonoma Valley, which would be from like Oakmont
yeah, I'm
this
sorry.
way, and the city of Sonoma. And if we started talking, would we be talking to the county, I guess the Board of Supervisors, City Council, but then would that have to go to a vote of the people, or it's just between those two
It'd be an
jurisdictions?
administrative action between the two member jurisdictions. Sorry about that, yeah.
So, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, so is this that word that I said before, harbinger of things to come? Will we lose control of our,
I don't know enough about the word harbinger to know if it can also be a positive thing.
word
And
I've always wanted to use, and I've used it 3 times here.
Should I look it up?
yeah, we just think it's an intriguing, rather than keeping every jurisdiction, you've got your walls and these are your numbers and figure it out. Is there an opportunity to partner and figure out maybe what works better with kind of a geographic area than every agency having to figure it out? So again, there may have to be some trade-offs, I mean, what would be in it for the other agency? Maybe the other agency wants to take more housing and they want more credit, and again, the way things, some of the things are moving too. You take more housing, you may get more transportation dollars. So, there could be some incentive for some of that as well.
Yeah, I think it's particularly interesting with the creation of the Springs MAC and the things that are happening in Glen Ellen around Snow Developmental Center and things like that. A lot of communities in the valley are starting to try to get a little bit more local control. So it's an interesting thought to learn more about, certainly. I mean, obviously no committing on either side of this right now, but interesting. For sure.
So,
Councilmember Hundley?
Well, it just seems to me, so this is basically setting a number, you can combine your numbers, and the benefit with us, combining with the valley, would be like, we could have higher density perhaps and more open space in the valley, or they would put something higher density in the city, and it's like, they get to benefit from us or we get to benefit from them, but it's not that, like, that's all it is. It's like checking off the box with your number, how are you going to allocate, how are you going to reach the number? I think that's what it is.
and regardless of whether we create a subregion or not, we as staff and the city will have the ability to challenge those numbers that we get, or at least to work on the methodology. And believe it or not, within the last 7 days, we've had a request to have somebody participate in the methodology, which I'll probably take that upon myself to do that. Either that or myself and or Wendy doing that particular process.
Thanks. Are there any other questions about this item? Vice Mayor Harvey?
Yeah, so when unincorporated areas, I mean, like Springs or El Verano or whatever, when RENA's assigning numbers, do they get a specific allocation to a specific, so it's just unincorporated Sonoma Valley or Sonoma County that gets it, and then the Board of Supervisors pushes that around, decides where it's going to go?
Yeah, typically that will be done through the zoning process. You'll see later on that within each housing element, as you prepare for that new element, you'll conduct a vacant land inventory in which you're to then have land zoned to equal the yield or the density, if you will, of that RENA number. In the case of the unincorporated county, you get a number and then it's parsed out into the 4 different income categories. Again, the low, very low, moderate, and above moderate.
And I think and this was a change in this last cycle. You didn't used to have to, you had a number and you just had to have a gross amount of acreage. But now you actually have to zone property. You're not doing the taking, but you're saying this property is eligible and it becomes a housing opportunity site for your RENA numbers. So cities have had to become more precise, which is, honestly raised concern sometimes from neighbors and neighborhoods. And so this whole process of the RENA process, and I don't know what it was like here because I was focused on another agency, but it definitely takes some time and it takes a lot of community outreach to look at and work through.
Your council may also be familiar with a certain community in the southern part of the state that removed some zoning or lands that was zoned as part of the RENA calculations and received the scrutiny, I believe, of the Attorney General recently. Begins with an H. With respect to our housing efforts, your council is very aware of the town hall series that we had. And as a result of that process, we can be talking about a housing action plan, possible changes to our development code relating to housing items, and specifically the ability to collect some money in which to do that from HCD funding from SB2. Again, we'll be talking about the RENA numbers that we just spoken about, and particularly with respect to a new element, we'll be completing a vacant land inventory, which is really, to me, the base blocks of how a community is going to grow, and specifically where.
And I think just one of the, if you go back after David, I think one of the questions that staff, and we talked a little bit with the subcommittee, with our housing subcommittee, I think as we look at our housing action plan, if that's our next step, there could be work that is done there that then naturally rolls into the housing element so that we're teeing a lot of that work up. And again, one of the first things you would do probably for our housing action plan, and or if you're jumping straight into your housing element, would be, what land do we have, what capacity, what can we really, what can we do now?
My next slide is just talk a little bit about the maps that we have. A lot of people have spoken about the general plan expiring, but we'll be talking specifically about one of the implementation measures in the land use element 1.51 with respect to the urban growth boundary. But before I do that, just want to talk about the general plan map. As I mentioned previously, we have general plan designations, zoning map district boundaries, if you will, and which include overlay districts, which the city has employed on more than one occasion. The boundaries maps include city limit lines. Obviously, that will be defining where our city has grown from its inception to where it is today. A sphere of influence is the probable physical boundary and service area of a local agency, such as the city. Most people refer to it as an SOI. In the case of our city and many cities in Sonoma County, we also have growth boundaries or an urban growth boundary or an urban limit line, one and the same thing, where we establish a boundary that separates urban uses from other types of land uses, mostly green belts and agricultural uses. Most of the urban growth boundaries have a lifespan of 20 years. This is very simply a map of our general plan. The colors are somewhat similar to those that are available on our zoning map. And I think I've just killed it again. Oh, there we go. There you can see our zoning map, and I apologize that these are kind of hard to read, but you can kind of get a sense for yellow being the residential areas, red being the commercial zones. Blue are usually quasi-public, like a cemetery, for example, or schools, and your greens are your open spaces and green belts and the like. The purple that we have is unique to the city of Sonoma because that includes our commercial and our residential mixed use zone. This particular diagram is presented, and it's looking a little bit pasty here, but you can kind of see the dark dashed line that shows you the urban growth boundary. The area of Montini Preserve, you can see, is within our SOI, and you can certainly see the city limits are in the darker green, if you will. The lighter colors that are inside the UGB are those areas that are outside of the city limits, but inside the UGB. Speaking of the UGB, the voters approved it in the year 2000, and it amended the 1995, the then current general plan to 2005, and it established the geographic limit for long-term development in the city. Basically, it embedded the UGB, or the boundary itself, in the general plan as a line, and it is at the time was coterminous with the SOI, except now that we have the Montini Preserve. You can certainly see that in the middle to the top edge of the map.
David, maybe finish the slide, but I think it's, if folks can see, it's a little bit helpful to kind of just walk around the edges and try to clarify what is within the UGB and what's outside the UGB, but in the city limits.
I'm not quite sure how I would do that. Do I have a laser or something?
No, but maybe I think most folks kind of know where some of the parcels are. So if you talk about Montini directly to the north, that's outside the UGB, but within.
Yeah, okay, it's outside the city limits, but inside the SOI. So if, for example, if we go clockwise, for example, if you go around there on the map, you'll see that the city limit line, which is a red line, is coterminous as you're going around from 1 o'clock to, let's say, 3 o'clock. In the 3 o'clock position, you'll see out there's a little flag lot, if you will, or a flagged area that shows you the area that could be considered for growth or expansion of the city limits to that UGB. There are several other places as well. As you go down to about 4 o'clock on that diagram, you can see what appears to be a rectangle, a square inside the UGB but outside the city limits. And also you'll see the area of Denmark Street, where you can see what appears to be an island. And what's a little bit confusing, at least from my eyesight, is that the street there, 5th Street East, is actually, I think, in the city limits, but creates a form of an island with those half a dozen to a dozen parcels there, of which we've had some interest from the owners in that area to be annexed into the city, or at least at a minimum receive urban services with respect to water and sewer. As you get to the bottom right-hand side around 5 o'clock, you'll see another piece of property there at the corner. Again, there's actually two of them almost close to one another. At the 6 o'clock position, south of Napa Road, you'll see that there's about half a dozen parcels that are outside the city limits, but inside the UGB and the SOI in this case. You'll also see that the Traintown parcels opposite Clay Street on Broadway, on the east side of Broadway, that is probably the classic case of an island, where it's surrounded on all four sides by city property, city limits. As you get to the 7 o'clock, you'll see almost a dozen or two parcels on the southwest side of the town, Harrington area. And then as you go around to the 10 o'clock position, if you will, you'll see the Maxwell Park and that area along Verano. You can also see on the north side of that area, where you don't see anywhere else, you'll see residential development on that northeast corner of the city limits. And you'll probably hear comments from residents within that area, as you heard earlier, from the Donald Street area. The provision of 1.51 in the general plan Oh, excuse me. Oh, with respect to the 1.51, the implementation measure of the general plan, it basically doesn't eradicate the urban growth boundary line, but does change the power, the ability to modify the UGB. It transfers to the city council, a majority of the city council at that date, following December 31st, 2020. So in that sense, there is a clock on one of the implementation measures again, and I'll share that just a little bit later.
Could you just go over briefly what the sphere of influence means?
Yeah, very briefly, the sphere of influence is a probable boundary. I think I made a, let's see if I can just go back to that slide here. Talks about the probable boundary, probable physical boundary, and also the service area. Typically, they're not coterminous.
So maybe like in more simple terms, if somebody owns a property outside of the city proper, but they're within the sphere of influence, or someone has a parcel of unimproved land in that area, what might they do with it? What does it mean to be in the sphere of influence?
Well, the land use entitlements would belong to the county and the unincorporated county if they wanted to develop. However, if it's coterminous or within an area it's close to or adjacent to our existing city limits, they can petition LAFCO for annexation, in which point they'd be able to receive city and urban services. Upon annexation, land use then comes to the city, and then we'd be able to issue development permits, whether it's a subdivision or commercial development.
I think the other thing that happens in a sphere, typically when you have a sphere, you are communicating that you think you're going to grow that way over the next 20 years. So that is one message you're sending. The other is when you have a sphere of influence, the county needs to communicate with the city when there is development occurring in there, and you have a more formal voice to communicate concerns, issues, feedback on those development projects. If you don't, if your city limits, UGB, and sphere of influence are all coterminous and something's happening kind of right outside those boundaries, you are not legally required to be noticed by the county agency. So there is, now could we comment on anything if we knew? Without a doubt, but you have a more formal voice when you do have that sphere as well.
I guess so. A project that is outside of the sphere of influence would not be eligible to receive public water and public sewer through the city of Sonoma, but a project that is within the sphere of influence may be eligible if the city council wants to endorse that project. Is that correct or not?
I think that's basically correct. The only piece that we have is a little bit of an anomaly where we have a prior water district, and it was an assessment district. Why am I blanking on the name? Help me, Colin. Sorry, Thornberry, excuse me. So there was an assessment district. There was a private water company that provided water. At some point that, I don't remember the date, that transferred, the city took responsibility for those water folks. And so there are it's been a small number of folks that were in that assessment district and that have gotten some water service, again, a small number. But that is kind of a unique situation and not a typical, and those folks, may have had some kind of vested rights since they were already part of that and paid in.
Okay, and then my last question, then Councilmember Hundley. So the urban growth boundary and the LAFCO approved boundary excluding Montini and the sphere of influence are all the identical map, is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Thanks. Councilmember Hundley.
So the sphere of influence, do we get to decide what it is, or do we have to get LAFCO has to say that we're allowed to have that in our sphere of influence?
Yeah, LAFCO is required to actually have them and actually review them every 5 years, but whether that gets done or not is a separate matter.
Has ours been reviewed anytime recently?
No, it has not. In fact, there's another requirement that LAFCO is supposed to do, and that is prepare master service reviews, or MSRs is what they're called. And that provides an analysis of our sewer, our water, police, fire, those kind of things. Components, in my view, that are preliminary or help us provide that data for our general plans. We can request it, but whether staff has the resources at LAFCO to do so, typically they only do that upon request of a public agency, as opposed to the clock that ticks every 5 years.
And could I ask
Councilmember Agrimonti.
So with LAFCO, it's not if we want them, it's if they want us.
Well, we can request an amendment to the SOI. In fact, sometimes you'll get a project on the outside of your SOI, if you will, and somebody petitions us for development. We can go to LAFCO on behalf of the applicant, as opposed to them filing a petition for amendment of the district. We can be the petitioners, if you will, with an application. We conduct the EIR or whatever environmental is necessary. Pre-zoning, you might have heard of pre-zoning before, and those kind of actions are taken, and you would knock on the door of LAFCO and they would be deciding whether they would do that or not. They're basically a reorganization or an organizational commission.
If the proposed project is not in the sphere of influence and is outside of the urban growth boundary, then can that project obtain city water and sewer?
I'm not sure of the answer to that one.
If let's
Probably
say somebody brings forward a project and we're like, this is such a great project, but it's outside of our sphere of influence, and we want to apply to LAFCO on behalf of that project and say, oh, this is a project we do want, but it's outside of the urban growth boundary. Can that happen?
I don't believe with the urban growth boundary, but I think you can amend the sphere of influence.
I'm saying,
But after December 31st, it would be my opinion that you could probably have 2020 that you'd be able to petition LAFCO to amend the UGB as a city council.
assuming the current UGB is in place for another 20 years by voter approval and cannot be changed, does that mean that the sphere of influence has to remain basically what it is now? Or if the sphere of influence were greater, does the UGB limit, does the sphere of influence and the UGB have to be identical? And if they're not identical, can city water and sewer go to something that's in the sphere of influence and not outside the UGB?
Let me try to answer that.
That makes sense.
The UGB measure itself, as currently crafted, actually contemplates a separate consideration between the UGB boundary that in 2000 became conterminous with the sphere of influence at that time. But the UGB measure goes on to say that the sphere of influence, SOI, can be changed independent of the urban growth boundary line. However, the urban growth boundary line delimits how far urban services should be allowed to go. So even if, for example, Montini, let's assume Montini was zoned high-density residential in the county, and now as part of our sphere of influence, our own general plan typically would indicate the type of zoning or land use designation that would be allowed. Let's assume that our own land use designation did also correspond to high-density residential. The UGB would not allow us to extend water service to that area.
Okay. So wherever the UGB is, even if the sphere of influence is further than that, limits how far water and sewer can go. And if you want to include an additional area outside the UGB, which might be developed using city water and sewer, it must be in the UGB, not just in the sphere of influence?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, the UGB itself has exceptions, and one of them is affordable housing, for example.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
So that was my question. I think you just answered it. So if there's an affordable housing project that meets the requirements under the UGB, we can extend water and services. We have to go to LAFCO for annexation, is my understanding, but we can extend those urban services, water and sewer to that outside of the UGB.
So thank you for getting me to the next slide, which shows those modifications to the UGB that are permissible. Number one is you can actually create, you can modify the UGB so long as it's within the boundaries of the current UGB, so you can decrease the size of it. The second one is, as we were just talking about with respect to affordable housing, there's a 5 and 20 acre limitation, 5 acres within any 1 year, and then 20 acre total prior to December 31st of 2020. There's also abilities to modify it so long as there's no takings, we're avoiding takings issues.
Just, David, go back, sorry, I want to, but in terms of the 5 acres annually and 20 acres total, there are some specific findings that have to be made for that to occur. So it has to be immediately adjacent to the UGB line. There's stuff about water and sewer, then primarily it's got to be for low and very low income. And it talks about having what is, and enough to accommodate what is required to meet state law. So the language here, there's a lot of UGBs in the state, and so there's different types of ways to phrase some of this and different ways to clarify. But there are some specific findings in the language that we'd have to meet.
So as I mentioned previously, the UGB itself, the line, does not expire in 2020, but that ability to modify it transfers to the City Council from the voters. And again, that's implementation measure 1.51, and I'd be happy to provide that language if you wanted to read it. There's about 6 or 7 paragraphs that are quite lengthy with respect to the terms and provisions that Kathy just mentioned. So the UGB provides us with the inability to approve any discretionary items, those things that require judgment on the part of the city. And we are allowed to basically regulate how development occurs inside the UGB, but outside is within the unincorporated county. So obviously we can't really affect any land use decisions on the outside or beyond the UGB.
I have a quick question. So because the sewer is not just a, well, Sonoma County Water is a larger agency than just the city, are they also limited by our sphere of influence? So they can extend a sewer anywhere they want? Are there any limitations?
I don't know what's there.
What's the Sonoma County, what's it, the water sewer sanitation district?
I think it's called Sonoma County Water now.
Is it Sonoma County Water?
Or that's what, something.
I do not know what rules
intuitive.
control how far they can extend their services. But they're not city rules.
Okay. Thank you.
It gets complicated. With respect to your thought process in the future for the general plan, whether it's respect to urban growth boundaries, how you accommodate affordable housing provisions, changes that you may wish to consider are actually including the Montini Preserve in the city limits, or including it within the UGB. We can also expand the SOI in the few areas that we have around town where the SOI is not coterminous with our city limit line. The theory is that you should have an area or areas in which to grow beyond your city limit lines, of which we have limited places throughout the city, as I mentioned some of those previously. One thing that I do want to point out to you is, and I'm not quite sure too much of the past, but in one other jurisdiction I went before LAFCO to create an area of concern, which is a geographical area beyond the SOI where you would receive basically information about land use decisions that the county is looking at. And I'm not talking about stop signs, it's something like subdivisions, minor land divisions, anything that relates to any decision-making process that we might be interested in amending our general plan with respect to assumptions and providing, more importantly, sewer and water of the like, as it's just on the northwest side of our city. We also believe as a staff that the language of the UGB could be amended to provide more clarity. There are some things that are confusing in the implementation component of the implementation measure. So choices for the general plan amendment process would be to retain the UGB as it is. It will continue after 2020, but the boundaries would be able to be changed by a majority of the city council. Alternatively, the council could place the UGB on the ballot, as could the voters provide it there, either in March or November of next year. We could certainly create a public process to review boundaries and the like, receive input from the citizenry and recommendations from the Planning Commission. We could also have to look at the CEQA review with respect to amending the boundaries. There are different options available to us with respect to whether the voters do it versus whether it's placed on the ballot by the City Council. I don't have the timelines available for you, but we can certainly report back on steps that need to be taken and when they need to be taken with respect to the March and November 2020 ballots.
I wonder, does the city attorney have any thoughts about your office would be writing that ballot measure, right? What is your timeline for a March or November ballot?
We just went through an updated UGB process with the city of Novato, where the council placed a revised and updated UGB measure on the ballot. I think it was in 2000, was it 18? It might have been last November. There too, I think the UGB expired either in a 20 or 25-year horizon. And the city met with a variety of stakeholders, primarily the staff, the planning director, with the stakeholders to develop proposed language that then was submitted to the council at several hearings with public input, and a final version was agreed upon. And that was then placed on the ballot. I believe that it was considered exempt. In fact, I think it was considered exempt because it was not allowing development. It was actually constraining and constricting it. So there was a determination that that was not allowing any, that would not likely have any environmental, or at least adverse environmental impact. And then the voters overwhelmingly approved it.
Do you remember roughly the time period on that? I'm just curious what the lead
It was
time
at
is.
least a year process.
Oh, a year. Okay. All right. Thanks.
It can be abbreviated, meaning if the council were to give direction to retool the UGB and put it on the ballot after a public process, certainly our office would rely on that Novato document, which we think is superior to the existing Sonoma UGB. Not
Well, we have a
surprising.
better town, so.
I don't know how much city staff input there was in connection with the drafting of the current UGB here in Sonoma.
Thanks.
And you'll find that ballot measure initiative was provided in your binders. I apologize for the faxy looking copy of it, but it's about the best one we could find at this point. With respect to our development code, the zoning code, if you will, that was adopted, as I mentioned previously, in 2002, and it was 4 years later that the city adopted the new general plan. For the most part, it's usually done the reverse way, but certainly we've been experiencing changes and issues with respect to our development code. As you know, the council has amended the development code or zoning code recently within the last 6 months with respect to wine tasting and commercial cannabis. These have been more policy type of amendments as opposed to rezoning properties, if you will. Various things to consider are consistency issues with respect to state law, perhaps changes relative to noticing requirements. One can look at it as a constraint to have 20 days requirement for public noticing. Some can look at it as a good public outreach process, so it cuts both ways. And certainly when we update our housing element tools, HCD will be looking for the removal of government constraints. So that will be something that they'll be looking at, not necessarily our own public notification process. I can tell you that in just about every jurisdiction that I've worked, it's been a 10-day public noticing provision. That makes Sonoma unique and helps provide for, again, more public participation and a thought process.
And maybe just one thing to add here is I think also we want to look at on-site noticing. Even though in today's digital age, people can go find things and understand what, go to a website and learn, but there is nothing like driving by a site, it's empty or construction starting to happen and there's a sign and there's a link and you can immediately get feedback. So sometimes those more traditional measures, frankly, are important, and we think that's an area that our code could use some updating as well.
And certainly with respect to parking requirements that we've seen around the plaza, with respect to the land uses that are in our development code, waivers, if you will, or grandfathering this or that, certainly we need to take a look at that and deal with some of the inconsistencies in our development code. There's various of them that I've seen since I've been here. So again, there are stories about the development code being problematic in the development process and causing lengthy, timely delays. So that's something we want to take a look at. New this year is HCD financing from Senate Bill 2, which does provide for our city, based on our population, $160,000 in non-competitive grants, as long as we're trying to figure out ways in which to update the zoning code and general plan to facilitate the building and construction and preservation of affordable housing or housing in general. We've probably all heard that the governor's trying to quadruple, almost triple, quadruple the amount of building and homes within the next 7 years. That be an unprecedented rate. And it's certainly not been the numbers that the BIA has been able to provide, let alone local agencies.
And even with the funding that council has set aside, which, staff is appreciative, and I think it's a really important thing that, we have this money set aside, odds are it's not enough to do everything, and do what you want to have done. So could we do it all for probably $1 million? Maybe. That may be closer, but just wanted to make sure that, I think we've got a good piece here, but we may need, because by the time you have to go do a full EIR, and if there's other studies you want to have done ahead of time, it may take more than what we have reserved. But part of it is, what is the process and what is the sequencing? I guess we definitely need to work with council on what do we want to do? How do we want to sequence it? What is the timing we want to do? Because it is time and money become connected in these things, and it's a rare thing to have a city say we're going to do this in 2.5 years and have it really take 2.5 years. In a lot of places, I've seen them. We're going to do it in 4, and it's 8 and 10, and literally, as the time stretches, it costs more money. So there's some strategy and talking, and we'll be looking for some guidance from council so that we lay out a process that we can work through and that works for the community and is done well and right, but doesn't stretch out so long that we lose all focus and it costs us more money.
Don't some places have a fee that every developer pays that goes into the general plan fund? And are we considering doing that, or can we consider doing that either for this one or the next?
Yeah, certainly. Kathy and I have been talking about it, and we actually have retained a consultant to look at that issue. In my other jurisdictions that I've worked as a director, we've been collecting 3% on just about every building permit that adds towards that. So between now and when the general plan actually gets done, should we not get any money from the state of California, that we could probably get upwards of around another $100,000 if we get that thing implemented. And that would obviously also go towards preparing the general plan update and an EIR. Should the council choose not to update the goals or the policies, but maybe 1 or 2 implementation measures, then obviously that's kind of allowing more time or more money to be devoted to perhaps doing the development code, depending on where the need is.
And can that fee just be passed by vote of the council?
It will need to come to you in resolution. So that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions if they come up.
Councilmember Agrimonti?
Yeah. So, Dave, you mentioned the governor, and of course, affordable housing is #1 to him, as well as the legislature. But again, we're not big, and we're not going to get incentive money for transportation funding because we don't have transportation hubs. We're far away from 101. What we have now is a clogged 37. So I personally don't see anything like that coming to us, at least in my lifetime. And the other thing, Kathy, the monies that we have set aside really provide us the funding to possibly partner with someone in affordable housing in some small way, because we're looking at far bigger, but it's a beginning.
Yeah, in terms of the Housing Trust Fund, the separate funding that council set aside, that with the loss of redevelopment, the money at this point that we see that we're going to be able to set aside, even with the 1% DOT council's done, is going to be looking at how do we partner, leverage, instigate, be a catalyst. It is by no means being able to start it and fund a project from beginning to end. We're not going to have that kind of money.
Are there other council questions? Councilmember Hundley?
I have 2 kind of questions. One, so like UGB is like related to this, but that's kind of our own thing. So it's whatever we want it to be. The state doesn't really care one way or the other than we follow whatever it is that we have. So if our the arena numbers come out in April, say they're higher, what happens if we don't have enough space within our UGB to accommodate all of our arena numbers? Who gets in trouble?
I'll get sued for the 2nd time in my career.
You
Literally.
get in trouble.
Yeah, I'll get in trouble. Yeah, because
We all get in trouble.
And then we'll go paint the town brown with high density zoning and conversion of land uses, that kind of thing. The state HCD will not certify our housing element as being adequate under the law, and so we'll be, it'll be a court action will take us to that point. But the goal is to have HCD review our element once it's prepared and give us a letter, and there's a certain clock that's out there that gives us the ability to respond and play ping pong with them about and receive their comments based on our element. But we're certainly not going to prepare a housing element that's deficient based on the ability to provide zoning for the lands that we have able to do that. And it may require us to change some of the yellow on the map to a brown in order to get those densities, to get the RENA numbers, depending on what that number is. So again, there's this methodology which we get to play with. Again, if I can just, it'll be April of this next year that HCD will give to the COG the determination for the COG to then go spread out.
ABAG.
Right, ABAG will give, ABAG will give to us the numbers.
So when would that get to us realistically? Probably not.
Well, within 18 months of April, basically, and that's why you end up at.
So we might not even know before we do the UGB what the numbers are.
Depending on what your choices are, correct?
Got it. All right, thank you.
Vice Mayor Harvey?
So I have a question also on RENA numbers. So we get RENA numbers every year. Every 5 years, 5 to 8 years. If we exceed those numbers, that doesn't roll into the next year, right? So it's just, we're starting from zero every year, no matter what.
Correct.
And then in your situation where we're painting the town brown to increase density, what if you do that and then none of the properties sell or turn over in any way, so there's really no ability to develop that? What happens in that kind of a scenario where these properties that would be, you could potentially develop, the owners are not willing to sell them, this land is staying as it is, and we're not able to hit our RENA numbers in a repeated way?
There's no punishment for not meeting your RENA. You just have to have the land colored, enabled for the market to do that. And many a time, the jurisdictions don't provide the lower end of those income categories. They always, for some reason, make the moderate and above. But there is no penalty phase. I'm sure that's probably going to be coming in my lifetime.
Yeah, and is it kind of it seems to me that the state is getting stricter about cities hitting these RENA numbers, that it's becoming more and more of an issue. Huntington Beach is, the first city that's been sued for not hitting their RENA numbers, and probably not the last.
Well, it's not that they've not made their numbers, it's just they took away lands that would have allowed them to get to that number. Right. And certainly when we do our vacant land inventory, we're going to need to show, based on the zonings for those respective parcels, how we meet this new number, which again will be increased from what we have. It's not going to be 137 units, I can promise you that.
Madam Mayor, can I ask a question? So where do appeals figure in on this?
So appeals, as far as the RENA numbers.
We present it, we approve it, but then it's appealed and we can't get the project going. How does that, is that a defense for us or not?
So approved projects versus what actually gets built.
Yeah. When do RENA numbers count?
Yeah, the state looks at a number for what it wants to see as a future growth number, and then it figures a way out how to divide that to the Council of Governments.
Different question.
I'm sorry.
If we approve a project but it never gets built because there's a lengthy lawsuit, does that count in your RENA numbers as a project, or does that not count because it never got built?
No, it counts. If you may recall that when we did our annual progress report to the state, we got credit for example, for the Saha project. Although it was approved through the discretionary item, it was not yet built. When those units get built, that will add to our RENA numbers.
So,
go ahead.
So it's, at what point can we report them to the state as we've achieved these numbers?
When the building permits are actually issued.
So not on approval of the council or planning commission, it's when they actually come in and pull building permits.
Building permits, correct.
And then if they languish and don't build after that point, it's not our fault, that's the developer's fault.
They want you to do the discretionary entitlements, but they're more interested in seeing the actual building permits pulled.
And to Madeline's point, you couldn't pull building permits really if you're under lawsuit.
That is correct.
Okay.
I have a possibly quick question. If it's not, you can answer it later. So for example, if a property has a requirement of being like 50% housing as an example, and the city council waives that requirement, say they did, is there any, so basically through an action of the council, you're taking away, you're sort of rezoning, you're saying, okay, you're not required to build housing on that site anymore. Is that allowed?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I really don't know how to answer
Right,
that.
so that's a later question. So I'm saying,
Yeah.
you're under the Huntington Beach, they
Oh.
changed the zoning to make it more difficult to develop land that was previously designated as a housing opportunity site. If we have land which is designated for housing, and we, on a particular item, waive the requirement that housing be built there, I am curious, and it could be answered later, why isn't that the same thing?
I think it is. For example, for Mockingbird Lane, for example, if the developer went belly up, couldn't do it, it got changed to commercial, for example, you've taken away that opportunity site and that ability. We might get the attention of the Attorney General, I think.
Oh, okay, interesting, thank you.
So that would be like
Councilmember.
only if the property in question was specifically a housing opportunity site. But my understanding is, as every opportunity site gets underdeveloped, you have to still go and find it somewhere else. But I don't know if we're
Yes,
doing that.
it's not called a catch-up, but you got to replace that missing
So you
component.
always have to have somewhere in your city where you could.
Yeah, and a lot of times agencies will do the math, so in cases when that happens, they don't have to go back and change somebody else's zoning to correspond with it.
Okay.
All right, Vice Mayor Harvey?
So you'll upzone areas with the kind of intention to, you probably come in under that, but if you go to another, like a Mockingbird site, which could have been denser than it is, when you're kind of down on that, you lose some housing there, you've already got approvals there, so you don't have to go and change the zoning, which is a more difficult process. That makes sense. Okay.
Are there any other council questions? Before we go to public comment, I would like to take a 5-minute recess.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Time do we?
Citizens of Sonoma,
Yourself, right?
let's start it again.
You ready?
One sec. We are reconvening our meeting, and the next portion of this agenda item is public comment. Please keep your comments to about 3 minutes and say your name and your address before you speak. And we are delighted to hear your comments on this matter. And as a reminder, any questions you ask, we will take a note of that, and all questions will be answered at the end of all public comment. Thanks.
Okay, my name is Stacy Scott, and my address is 387 Denmark. My husband and I have been coming to this house since 2001, when it was owned by my late mother-in-law. We took over the house in 2014, and in order to afford the significant cost of ownership, we have a permit to do some occasional short-term rentals. We pulled that permit in 2014. We've had some septic issues over the years, and we learned in 2018 of March that we could likely annex into the city sewer, which is located right in front of our house. In 2018 of April, we engaged in an engineering firm to pull an application for the county for a sewer annexation permit, which they accepted. In February of this year, we learned that LAFCO would not support a sewer annexation property unless we fully annexed into the city of Sonoma. The county never discussed this annexation with us when they accepted our $6,200 for our permit application. We do not want to fully annex into the city, as we don't want to jeopardize our short-term rentals, which we need to afford to keep the house. We do not need city water due to 2 good working wells. We have learned that our home is within the county island of the urban services area and the urban growth boundary. My question to the city council is whether the city intends to fully annex any additional properties like ours. If the city does not want to do an additional annexations, then we understand LAFCO may be willing to support a sewer-only annexation for our property. That's it.
Thank you.
Hello again, David Morrell, 483 Mall Court. The session, I think I want to congratulate both the council and the staff, Kathy, David, for an excellent start to an incredibly complex and equally important process. I'd like to speak briefly about the urban growth boundaries. Looking back over these 10 years and more, they've been terribly important in creating the kind of open space preservation that we all, I suspect in this room, have come to love and to appreciate having available. However, we're now facing the kind of housing issues that we didn't understand 10 years or 20 years ago, and certainly didn't face in the kind of legal constraints that are about to come on to us from Sacramento, and maybe eventually even federally. So in going forward with respect to the UGB, I think we need to introduce what I call limited flexibility in our approach to the UGB. And there are lots of details. David touched on many of them already. 3 minutes won't be possible to cover those kind of details. Flexibility and limited are both critical. Some push out to get the right land at the right price at the right time may be imperative. We may need to do that rather than looking at the current UGB as something given manna from heaven, as something that cannot be altered. Thus, flexibility, some ability to be flexible with respect to UGB, but control is also vitally important. We cannot go hog wild and get rid of the urban growth boundaries, thus my concept of limited flexibility. I know for sure, in conclusion, that we cannot rely on just a guideline to set our limits and stick to them. Look at what's happened to us with Shockin Hill. With a 5,000 square foot guideline that wasn't interpreted to mean, well, maybe 5,200 for the right reason to save an oak tree, but pushed up to 15,000 because it's a guideline as opposed to a rule. So if we begin to alter UGB, my approach is to set a specific limit on that. I haven't done the research yet, I don't think anybody has, to determine what that limit should be, but I think desperately important that we have a limit, something like 5% of total land to be brought in an expansion, or 3% or 7%, some tight number that will limit our ability to use the flexibility we need to accomplish our affordable housing objectives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Once again, I'm Paul Rocket, 781 Ernest Drive. And I would just add that as a result of this injustice that we've had upon the Donald Corridor up on the northwest side of town, where we were stolen and put into the Springs Pacific Plan, we now have little control over what's happening to development in that area. And I feel that I would urgently implore you to consider including us in your sphere of influence, which according to the maps we're not at this point, to extend the urban growth boundary around us rather than underneath us along Verano. And with my time left, I want to add one more thing that's on a totally different subject. Based on what I saw about the general plan, one thing that concerns me that I don't see in there at all is any consideration of climate change. We all know this is happening around us. And in fact, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has claimed almost unanimously that in 2040, this is a crucial year in which temperature extremes will accelerate faster than they have, in which extreme weather will happen at a much higher rate than it is now, in which we may get more climate migration from the south to the north. And this is a chance for you folks to sit down and do some planning. You probably have as much likelihood as predicting that as any other growth that you may have in the area. So I hope you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Brigode, 240 Del Rio Paseo. I'm an affordable housing developer, but I speak tonight as a citizen of Sonoma. We had a presentation earlier with the statement, ours is a diverse community where residents and their children will choose to remain. We're not a diverse community, and residents and children are unable to choose to remain in the place where they grew up. I think we need to acknowledge the depth of the housing crisis. I think that's acknowledged. I think it's a major topic of conversation in town. The key thing we're looking at is the lack of developable land. You look on the west side, it's a big construction site. I guess that's wonderful. It's largely market rate with a few affordable units thrown in. I supported the urban growth boundary. I voted for it in the year 2000. Those of us who grew up 50s, 60s, and 70s remember just the ugly crap sprawl that's happened everywhere in this country. And the infill requirement has been successful now. The vacant land in town is rapidly filling up. We were able to, working with the city was able, using redevelopment funds, to acquire the land for the Valley Oaks project and for the Altamira project that's due to break ground. We neither have vacant land nor redevelopment funds anymore. It's an entirely different situation, and adopting a rigid 20-year cap on affordable housing production is just not going to work. We have people proclaiming that we have a regional housing needs allocation, and that's a cap. not a bottom. It's a cap that if we hit that point, let's just stop and never go there. The urban growth boundary also places limits on dealing with the missing middle, people between 80 and 120% of AMI. I think we really need to see some, to borrow a phrase, some limited flexibility in the way the urban growth boundary is implemented or redrafted. I don't think we want to use this entire process here. We have water moratoriums going back to 1976. We have 20-year urban growth boundaries. We have RENA numbers that didn't take into effect the impact of the fire that we just had. And smart growth does not mean no growth. Smart growth is not economic segregation. Smart growth is not the denial of opportunity. Now is the time to be bold, and don't use this whole planning process as an excuse not to act. We've placed ourselves in a straitjacket to implementing what we all want to see get done. And I think it's time to have that kind of flexibility in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Marty Bennett, and I live at 19167A Robinson Road, Sonoma, and I'm with North Bay Jobs with Justice. I canvassed several precincts and campaigned for the original urban growth boundary ballot initiative approved by the voters with a 64% yes vote in November of 2000. I urge you to renew the existing UGB by approving another ballot initiative for the November 2020 general election. If the voters approve the UGB again, then only a vote of the people can change the UGB. The UGB is a line beyond which urban development will not be allowed except for public schools and parks. The voters of all 9 cities in Sonoma County have adopted UGBs over the last 20 years. As intended, I believe the City of Sonoma UGB has prevented sprawl, preserved agricultural lands and open space, and encouraged denser city-centered growth. UGBs are not the cause of the affordable housing crisis in our valley and our city. The root causes of the crisis are, 1, the stagnation of incomes and wages for the bottom 60% of wage earners in Sonoma County over the last 3 decades. 2, skyrocketing rents and housing prices driven by real estate speculation, the tech bubble, gentrification, and the recent Tubbs fire. 3, the dramatic decline of funding for affordable housing from both the state and federal governments, and particularly the abolishment of city redevelopment district by the state. Planned Bay Area, a state mandated integrated long-range transportation, land use, and housing plan designed by ABAG and the MTC demonstrates that we have enough space within our existing Sonoma County cities and towns to accommodate 100% of the region's future growth through 2040 and beyond. Solving the housing crisis requires a multifaceted approach, including raising the wage floor, deterring real estate speculation and the drive for super profits by landlords, securing new local sources of funding for affordable housing, and making sure the updated general plan encourages the building of higher density multifamily housing that people can afford, nearby services, jobs, and public transit.
Thank you, Marty.
Good evening. I'm Claudia Robbins. I live at 19167 Robinson Road, Unit A, here in the city of Sonoma. And I too want to encourage the City Council to put the UGB, the current UGB, to a vote of citizens of Sonoma and voters of Sonoma, rather than have it be up to the City Council. It should be renewed for 20 years. I've heard the concern about meeting housing requirement, and I do not think that extending the UGB will meet that need that's required by state law or ABAG or whatever the terms are that I don't use. The having more land doesn't necessarily guarantee affordable housing or middle income housing. We know the kinds of developments that go on, and even to meet the state requirement for affordable housing, how developers can move around those by the size of their development. So extending a UGB in order to provide more land for housing does not guarantee that it will be affordable or will increase the diversity of incomes in our city that our general plan would like to have. So I encourage you to renew the current UGB and to put that to a vote of our Sonoma residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, David Eicher, 1110 Loma Court. We do need more affordable housing. If you just build more market rate housing, it kind of makes the problems worse that we already have. Is that we've seen from the Nexus study that just market rate housing will induce need for more affordable housing, because it'll be more services, and the services that will be the low income for the retail and restaurants and that type of thing. And so I was prepared to say possibly we need to expand the UGB to allow the more affordable housing. But I heard two things here tonight which tell me that it almost be best to keep the UGB as is. And number one is that the UGB allows for the city to provide the services for affordable housing outside the UGB. So if you have a piece of land outside the UGB that you put affordable housing on and get services, then that's more of an incentive to build affordable housing than try to build market rate housing, but you can't get the services for it. Number two, I heard tonight, why to keep the UGB as is because of the CEQA. And if you keep the UGB as is, you're not expanding it, therefore you're not inducing more growth, and therefore it probably can just be a negative declaration. That'd be a good question. If you're not expanding it, there's no more growth. And that could reduce the cost for any CEQA requirements on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gary DeSmet, Donald Street. And thank you for looking at speakers. I've been to a couple of Board of Supervisors meetings, and they're looking at laptops, computers. It is very disconcerting. So thank you. The Spring-specific plan has been just an amazing experience of learning for our neighborhood. It was discovered accidentally by one of our residents in January of this year, and a meeting was called by her, and within 24 hours, 50 people showed up. It has been a firestorm of learning. If you look at the map, and I don't, you know the town as well as I do. If you go up on Verano, and there's the Dome Church, and behind the Dome Church is a vacant piece of land, and beyond that is a fourplex, and there's Donald. So just imagine that strip of Donald. To the east end, where there's a bed and breakfast. And then as you come back west on Donald, there's a convalescent home, Sonoma Acres. So the lot behind the church, which has been bought, 3 acres. The convalescent home, 3 acres. The bed and breakfast, 3 acres. So you were talking about the brown, a map turning brown. That's what I think initially just exploded our brains, was that we were looking at proposed maps that had turned brown. So, right in our little tiny neighborhood. So what I want to point out is some of the things we've learned is that the county was given an allotment. The number we've heard was 30,000 additional units. 30,000 additional units for the county. We think, the neighborhood is pretty sure, that what happened was planners looked at our little neighborhood, and if you look at the map later, you'll see that there are vacant spots in our little neighborhood on the south side of Donald. On the north side of Donald, it starts to go up the hill. The county wants to preserve that as wonderment. They put down 1.33% of their 30,000 units in our little neighborhood, 400 units. It works out to 12 units an acre, but that's not it, because they get a 100% bonus if it's affordable, so 24 units an acre. The way you do that is 3-story buildings, which is in the wording of the Spring-specific plan. They've, on Verano, there's those deep 5 lots. They were described by Supervisor Gordon as being underutilized. So her vision is that they won't be single-family homes, but they will in fact be 24 units an acre. So 3-story apartment block, 3-story apartment block, 3-story apartment block. I dig it. It's cool. They're all over. They're in Napa, Santa Cruz, Petaluma. I've seen them. They're not ugly. The thing is, they will come out onto Verano. So the Winnipesaukee, you please, your people live on the Winnipesaukee neighborhood. I don't think they know this. Highway 12 is a wreck today. It's going to become more of a wreck. You are exactly right, Councilmember Agrimonti. Vehicle miles traveled.
Thank you, Gary.
Done?
If you want to,
God
last
bless
thought. Right back at ya.
Hi, Colleen Uten-Cowan, and I live on Ernest Drive. And I agree with everything Gary is saying. It's just going to be this traffic nightmare. I mean, like what, I think 800 more cars if you, count 2 per household. But my concern really is we provide all this housing, and who does it support? We don't have jobs in the community. We have wine jobs in Sonoma. We don't have any industry here. So the jobs are for those in Marin County. Everybody's driving down to Marin County or to the city to work. So we are just this little commute place where everybody lives and then commutes. What I want to understand is, how does Marin County, I understand there's zero growth. They signed that into place in the 70s. That's why they're not building down there like they are here, because they have some zero growth on the books for them, so they don't have to provide housing, but we do. So how do we get zero growth, or at least, at the very least, that the housing that we do provide goes to the people that need it, that work at Safeway, that live in this area? Because we don't need to provide housing to people in Marin County because they work down there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. My name is Gary Germano. I live at 18850 Melvin Avenue, and that is right in the Donald Street area over there. I'm part of the neighborhood. However, I'm not talking for Donald Street or that tonight. I'm talking strictly on housing. And I'm cutting my short little story out because I don't know if I have enough time, and I'll put it in at the end if there is. But the moral of the story is that everybody has a right to live somewhere, but I feel they don't have a right to live where they want to simply because they want to live there but can't afford to. Sonomans do not have an obligation to provide new homes in Sonoma for anyone who wants to move here from any outlying area. My wife and I moved here in 2001 to our house that was built in 1936, so it's like 83 years old. Had we not found a house here, we would have found a different house here or moved somewhere else where we would want to move or could afford to move if this was too much at the time. Sonoma is a small geographic area in the valley with a small infrastructure, meaning roads, sewer, and water. It has 3 ways in and out: Highway 12 to Napa, Arnold to 37 or Petaluma, and Highway 12 to Santa Rosa. All 3 are lined in areas with trees under power poles, which weren't planted by PG&E, which can in a firestorm fall and cut off any or all egress. From safety perspective, as well as numerous other logistics, I believe Sonoma is at or over capacity. If you're observant and look up at the northern and eastern hills surrounding our valley, when you're driving up Arnold Drive or 5th Street West, you'll see that the tops of our hills are largely burned away from our last fire. It's a blessing we are all here today at this meeting. And anyone in these last almost 2 years, has anyone managed the trees and created fire breaks to protect our whole town? Apparently not. The trees are like wax-coated candle wicks without a candle. They torch immediately. Firefighters refer to tightly packed trees as fuel, and rightly so. This needs to be attended to now. I agree we need affordable housing for seniors and low-income people, but we have to find it within the housing stock we have already built. Examples are when current people who cannot live in their homes any longer become available for sale, or when people who own rental units and want to sell them. We need to pass laws that give them creative tax incentives to sell to organizations for affordable housing. Affordable housing has to be sustainable. It needs to pay for itself or have a source of perpetual finance, like an endowment. Otherwise, when the money runs out, everything falls apart. And it has to be area specific. If we in Sonoma provide affordable housing to people working in Santa Rosa, we're defeating our own purpose. It wastes housing for our people in Sonoma who need it. It wastes unpaid time to commute. It wastes fuel and subsequently money that people don't have. It adds more pollution to the air, and on and on. It is a total lose-lose proposition. I'm just wrapping it up. I am told...
you know what? We actually have people behind you, and I can't let you go on anymore. But I appreciate your comments
okay.
so far.
I'm going to say one thing. Rather than reject the idea, think about it long term.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening, Mayor Harrington, City Council members, staff, and members of the public. My name is Terry Shore. I'm the Regional Director for the North Bay for Greenbelt Alliance and a 30-year resident of Sonoma Valley. The most important direction you can give to staff tonight is to prioritize the renewal of the existing urban growth boundary for another 30 years with a vote of the people before it expires next year. This is the best way to protect the natural and farmlands that surround the city, prevent sprawl into the greenbelt, and keep our homes, businesses, and schools inside the city to ensure a climate-smart future for the next generation of Sonomans. The environmental and public health impacts of the UGB are clear. Keeping development within the UGB reduces driving and greenhouse gas emissions and those VMTs, saves money on water, sewer, parks, and roads, reduces wildfire risk, and allows for housing across the income spectrum. And it costs taxpayers nothing. All 9 cities in Sonoma County have urban growth boundaries, most of which have been renewed as is without controversy with the support of each of the city councils and 70, wide margins of the voters. The urban growth boundary here and around the county is not the cause of the housing crisis, nor is it the solution. The urban growth boundary defines where we build, not what we build. That is up to all of us, the city council and the community. All you need to do is look around the Bay Area and around the state to see that sacrificing greenbelts for sprawl does not provide affordable housing. It just doesn't, it hasn't, and it won't. The UGB is actually the perfect tool for creating innovative new housing options for the next century. What we build now will be here for another 100 years or more. So let's build a future where we can live, work, and play in Sonoma and more easily walk, bike, or take the shuttle instead of driving. And when it comes to the City of Novato, Greenbelt Alliance was a key partner with the city and the lead organization. They renewed their existing urban growth boundary in November of 2017. The City Council voted to put it on the ballot in March, and it was completed by August, the deadline, and went to the voters by a huge margin. We had full support of the City Council. So I thought I'd just kind of fill in those details. Novato does have some differences from Sonoma in terms of sanitation district and sewer. They're separate entities, so it was a little more complicated. So I would not use Novato as the model for renewing the City of Sonoma UGB. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Good evening, Mayor Harrington and City Council. I'm Carol Marcus, 873 First Street West. And I want to thank the staff for doing such a great job with the staff report and thorough kickoff to this whole subject. I too want to sort of urge you to put on the ballot the renewal of the existing UGB. I also think that there is not a connection between the provision of affordable housing and the UGB. In fact, the UGB as it currently exists allows exemptions for affordable housing outside of the UGB. So it's just very important that those two issues not be linked, and I would just refer you to the letter that I sent you late this afternoon regarding that, and thanks for taking the time to read that. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good evening. Tom Conlon, 18850 Robinson Road. I'm going to try and wear 2 hats in 3 minutes. And first of all, I'm going to speak as a resident of that Donald Street neighborhood, North Sonoma, we call it. I have a question that I'd hope you can follow up on. We met with the deputy planner recently, and he indicated that our neighborhood is currently zoned by the county with what they call a B8 designation, which indicates that it is in the city's sphere of influence. And I don't see it tonight in your map. And so I think that may be an artifact of the county not updating their own zoning after some decision made by the city. But I do think it's worth tracking that down to understand. Now, I've been impressed at the range of comments tonight. I think we're off to a good start in a community conversation. But I disagree with some of my friends on this. I think that we need to preserve the urban growth boundary and give it a chance to actually work. We've only had it for a relatively short time. And the city needs to function as a city and stop the sprawl that has happened throughout our country and throughout the Bay Area. you know, our neighborhood is being proposed for relatively aggressive upzoning right now. And that would be appropriate only if the city had already done something more aggressive inside the city limits. It's really unfair for you guys to put that pressure on the adjacent neighborhoods of the city. And I think it would be unfair to sprawl out into the east side of town or the south side of town and put higher density developments, affordable developments in those outlying communities. If we're going to be paying attention to our circulation and frankly just the livability of our community, we need to build in the city center. I'm going to take that hat off. And I'm going to just say respectfully, I appreciate that you will take a look at our letter from the Sierra Club Executive Committee of Sonoma. We strongly would like to see you extend, through a vote of the people, the urban growth boundary with its current designation. And we do think that we proved that the other night when we had Jim Hyde down for an exercise. We found we were able to accommodate quite a good deal of growth inside the city limits on the circulation corridors. And so I would hope that you would take advantage of that experience that we had together that night and have that be our building block going forward, protect our existing UGB. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. My name is Jack Dean, 859 Pearl Street. I support both affordable housing and the UGB. However, today is totally different place. We talk about totally different topics. My understanding is, and affordable housing is not directly related how to use the land. Instead, it is related to how to generate job opportunity, quality job opportunity. In our town, 64% industry, business belong to service. I love my kids, but I really don't want to see they work in the tasting room and the restaurant, earn $12 or $13 and plus the tips. That is ridiculous. That is, I feel very sad. So again, I support some minimum wages, $15 minimum, of course. But even we got approved the $15 minimum wage in the Sonoma, even you still cannot get affordable housing. That is true. So I think UGBs is kind of a gift for our people right now, prepare a gift for our future kids. It's a long term, just like a gentleman said, we look at the future. So that we are lucky and grateful to live and work here in Sonoma. Although it is a small, but the strength of our community is tremendous and unmatched. We must continue honor and cultivate Sonoma's legacy to ensure when we pass on our city to the next generation, it will become more beautiful, healthy, strong, economically and structurally. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack.
Hello again, Ann Colachitas, 14 Hacienda. Thank you, Director and Council, for a very interesting session today. This hearing is a wonderful beginning to some public conversation on some important topics of the future of our town. You know, when I was new here, someone gave me a copy of the book, A Tale of Two Valleys. And it was very interesting about contrasting Napa Valley with Sonoma Valley and highlighted some people we know, some visionary citizens who worked to get the UGB that we know today. And I'd really like to hear from some of them really what they think now of the fruits of their work after this time, and if they had any lessons that they may have learned watching over the last 20 years. I think that would be really useful information. Also, there was some conditions about affordable housing with the UGB, and it sounds really good, but apparently so those conditions, there are conditions there that would be very difficult to meet in order to use that whatever is in the language of the UGB. So I wish that we could find out really what that entails. Apparently that the past planning director mentioned that they were going to be difficult to accomplish. So anyway, but otherwise, thank you very much. That was a very good session. I really loved hearing from everyone who made their comments here. And that's it.
Thank you, Anne.
Hi. My name's Vicki DeSmet. I live at 600 Donald Street, and I moved here 35 years ago. I've owned 2 homes within the city limits, and 27 years ago, we purchased our property on Donald Street and built our home. I've been sitting here wondering, what is an urban growth boundary if the county is allowed to propose and develop a huge development right outside of your city limits? This is the thing that bothers me the most, is that most of the town isn't aware of what is being proposed right outside its door. And I'm for affordable housing. I married a teacher. My daughter's a teacher here that works at the high school. She's a math teacher here. She needs affordable housing. We're not against development, but I would really wish that our property was within your sphere of influence, so that when these proposals are made, you guys are the ones deciding what's going to be built there, and not supervisors, a majority of just 3 of them that don't live here, that maybe probably don't care what goes on in our valley. So I really hope that at some point you guys consider thinking about what's happening right outside of the city limits and considering including us in your sphere of influence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Harrington, council members. My name is Bill Willers, 873 First Street West. There was an interesting article in the Mercury News today, and it begins with the title, Bay Area Housing, Even Harder Than You Thought to Buy. But what it concludes is, since 1960 median, this is nationally, since 1960 median home prices in the U.S. adjusted for inflation has increased 121%. While rents have grown 72%. And at the same time, the U.S. median household income has grown by 29%. That's what you have a housing crisis from. Income has not kept up with the cost of living. It has nothing to do with the UGB. It has nothing to do with your policies and zoning, although they can help correct it. What it has to do with the affordability of the average person making the average income to buy the average house. In the Bay Area, it takes 9 times the median income to buy the average median income or median cost house. We're not going to solve that problem by extending our UGB. We're not going to solve that problem by extending the sphere of influence. What we're going to do by extending the sphere of influence is put pressure on that land to be developed, because the city will say that land is open for development. The Citizen Valley Advisory Commission will review any project that comes forward on those properties, and that's how the city has some form of input on what happens on those properties. I encourage the City Council to put on the ballot the existing UGB as it was written 20 years ago. I'm happy that I was part of that process, and I'm very proud of what it's maintained our community as. I'm happy to have been involved 20 years ago in redoing the development code, and I have a lot of suggestions on how we can modify that to make it better. Our general plan is a very good general plan. It was recognized by the state and won an award by the state, and I think it was very forward-looking 20 years ago. What you'll find is, if you read the general plan, that much of the policy direction and implementation measures that are in that general plan are what are being espoused by the state today as goals for producing housing in communities. Infill housing, 20 units to the acre. I'll go down the list, but our 20 years ago, our general plan put forward those ideas in this community, tightened its sphere of influence, tightened its growth, and said we're going to build inside. There are 9 parcels on the. Let me do this one time just because. There are 9 parcels on West Napa Street on the south edge. I think you all know them. They're underutilized commercial properties. They're crying to be used properly in our community. We extend our urban growth boundary. We take the pressure off of reutilizing those parcels. Those 9 parcels are zoned at 20 units the acre commercial. They have the opportunity for 340 units of housing. If you, as policymakers, put the proper
I think I'm gonna have
policies
to
in
call
place and uphold them.
Thanks.
Oh, the ancient one. Hello. I mean, you have to have the wisdom of Solomon to work through this. It's a phenomenal, difficult issue, and I just admire your stamina and trying to struggle with it. But I think we definitely need to support the UGB. I've known about it for hundreds of years now, and 20 or 30, whatever we have. And then I'd also want you to really support that. And I really want you to begin to think of no single homes at all in rezoning the town of Sonoma. So if you're going to redound it, I'd have no single homes in this town. And I think we're going to just have to we just love our little town, and we love all these little, and I think around the hospital is crying. People who own homes around there, in the hospitals, 3 or 4, whatever the storage of the silly hospital is, and the neighborhood all could be that height. And I know I live in luxury in a single home estate on a preserve, and I realize what an elitist person I've been over the years and how things have changed. And we have very little time. I agree with whoever the gentleman says that we are really up against it with climate change. And you really got to begin to think of, forget the Sears Point Raceway, get rid of the damn thing. I wrote a letter about adding it to the Tule Lake Preserve. And you don't want to hear more from me, but you know, we love the automobile, and we got to get out of the damn automobile and do something. You know, rickshaws. I don't know what. Then that's probably racist, but we got to change right now, and our time is of the essence. And I know you know all this, and we've had wonderful, wise people just speaking to you. So I don't envy your line of work, but go for it.
We are always glad to see you. Thank you.
At least you'll maybe have a living wage, which is something.
Patricia Cullinan.
Top that, Patricia.
I can't, but I'm going to be short and sweet here. I want you to remind you guys to create a robust cultural resource element in the new general plan, which is paramount to our economic well-being here and reinforces our town character. And also I agree with prioritizing the renewal of the the uniform growth boundary.
Thank you.
Vic and 40, 206 East Spain Street. I just wanted to help Bill finish his thought. First of all, the Greenbelt perimeter, where there's land that you might square off some of the lines or whatever, creates additional acreage within the Greenbelt limits. Those are surrounded or adjacent to low-density housing. And the type of housing that would be appropriate there would be a battle with the neighbors if high-density housing were proposed at the edge of the town. It does belong in the middle of the town, along the highway and along the circulation corridors. And Bill was mentioning West Napa Street from 5th Street west to the bend there. those are really underdeveloped, underused property, especially on the south side of Napa Street, and with mixed use projects, 3 stories could be commercial on the ground floor to provide for some jobs, and then 2 stories of housing above. You could achieve 20 unit per acre and commercial on those along that area, and create, as Bill mentioned, up to several hundred units, enough to cover our requirements or our goals for housing numbers. And those would be smaller, more affordable, probably rental type housing. But that sort of thinking is important, because anything on the perimeter, a developer is going to want to build the lowest density as possible. That's the highest profits for them. And they will, especially if it's just zoned that without, zoned a residential, consistent with its neighbors, you're not going to get affordable housing from that. You'll get 20% inclusionary, but beyond that, you're not going to really get significant numbers of the type of housing we need. So, thank you.
Thank you, Vic. Is there anyone else? Ta-da!
Sorry. Mayor, City Council, Nancy Kerwin, 1920 Grove Street, Sonoma. I just wanted to clarify a point that I included in my note that I sent to you earlier. That it was said in the presentation that if we extend the UGB, that it will become an inflexible for the next 20 years. We'll be stuck with that. But part of having the voters vote on it is that they can vote to change it if it becomes required. So it's not inflexible. It is still subject to being able available for change if necessary. The other thing is if we don't take it to the voters and it does end up being subject to the city council being able to change it, you all won't necessarily be our future city council. Much as we love you, you might choose to do something else. And we don't know who will be sitting there, whose whims we will be subject to. So I really encourage this to be put on the ballot for voters to vote on. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to comment on this matter? Seeing none, I will close public comment, and we will start with the questions that were brought up during public comment. The first question was, does the city intend to annex Denmark Street? Just when you were leaving. I think that question can't be answered this evening, but perhaps a brief discussion of the timeline on those types of questions could be answered.
I'm not sure we can answer that yet. It is a matter of how we sequence this in terms of timing, and kind of looking at the UGB versus other general plan pieces. So I think any answer tonight is very premature. I think, while it's not the answer that's wanted by, the individual who spoke, Ms. Scott, it's clearly, we're at the beginning of this process, and this process will take some time. So I think as we lay out some timing over the next 60, 90 days and kind of come back with some pieces, we'd be able to give you a better time frame for when those questions would be coming to council. But tonight I would be just guessing, and that's not appropriate.
All right, thank you. The next question is, Donald Street, the neighbors were told that it was a B8 designation, that it was in our sphere of influence. Does anybody know about that?
I don't know, and David and I looked at each other. We'll have to follow up with county staff. One thing David's been working on since he became director is building good relationships with those folks, and so we have a note that we'll make a call there, and we can get back to folks there.
And I don't know that this can be answered succinctly, but perhaps it can. I think the question was, how do we make local workforce housing as opposed to building housing for other areas?
So this is a tougher one, and I'll look to both Jeff and David to answer more succinctly, but there are federal housing laws that basically mean we have to keep things open, and we can't basically, as I understand it, or historically have not been able to pre-designate. This is clearly really important community that I've heard from council members, I've heard from commissioners, I've heard from community members. You know, if we're taking our precious dollars, our precious taxpayers' dollars, and we're putting into how to build and support local affordable housing, how do we create processes to try to ensure or try to at least facilitate our residents or our employees being able to use that first? So it may be, I definitely have heard of affordable housing developers where you have a list, but maybe you're only marketing that list more locally first. So there's ways to do some of that early release so that information gets marketed to and more locally in the community before you're putting something out. So, and I'll turn to Jeff. I think this is a question that, you know, we may need to look into a little more as well, but that's part of the tension we have, so.
My speaker unit apparently is not working.
We can hear you. Okay. The basic rule is that under fair housing laws.
Can, David, could you give him yours, perhaps?
Mine's disconnected too.
Oh.
Jeffy's is the only one that's working.
What'd you do, Bob?
Mr. IT guy. Now it works.
I unplugged everyone, not Michael. Never what you want to do. Go ahead, Mr. Walter.
Thank you. The fair housing laws prevent cities from setting up preferences for affordable housing that cities fund in whole or in part that have the operative effect of discriminating on the base of the various protected classes that have become recognized over the course of our legal system: race, gender, sexual preference, marital status, et cetera, et cetera. So if in fact, for example, the council decided that affordable housing that it was funding was going to be made available first to teachers, K through 8 teachers in the city of Sonoma, you'd have to take a look at that group demographically and otherwise to see whether it reflected very closely the demographics of the community from which the potential residents would come. So you have a fight over what is that community, how do you define that community? And if, for example, let's assume in this wild hypothetical, all the teachers were white men, you'd have a problem with, this is a hypothetical, people. Don't get exercise here, okay? I want to make it simple. It's easy to discriminate against white men, all right? So anyway, white men were part of this, that was the group. And if that is not representative of the community that's used as the measuring stick, then that is a suspect preferential treatment that would probably fall prey to a litigation. So it's a
Or
very...
even if you just had a community, let's say you had a community that was predominantly white, almost everybody were white in that community. If you limited the housing to people that already lived in that community, then that would be perhaps preferential treatment because you were not allowing other groups to participate in getting that housing.
I don't know that nuance, to be honest with you. So what?
So it has to be white men.
If they're all white men in your community and the teachers are all white men, probably you're safe.
So, could I ask a question? Just in that San Francisco, of course, is building something for teachers. I don't know if that's private funding. I have no idea what that is. But so how do they get around that?
It may be the case that in San Francisco, the community of teachers is very similar to the community from which they draw potential residents.
Oh, the teachers are more diverse.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether, my understanding is it doesn't matter whether it's private or public or nonprofit development, whatever, these laws always apply. Fair Housing Act always kind of applies, right? You can't have a private development and then carton that off for a specific group of people, is my understanding. But I think that this is an issue that we really need to look into. It's an issue that really is something that the community is very interested in. It's something that I'm interested in. And it's something that Healdsburg is exploring in a real way. They're basically, the way that their ordinance works, as I understand it, it's people who live and work in Healdsburg get first dibs, and then it's people who work in Healdsburg, and then it's people who live and work in the surrounding community, and then people, and it gets wider and wider and wider each time, so eventually everybody gets an opportunity. I There's questions of whether or not that ordinance is legal, whether or not it conflicts with the Fair Housing Act, and I think those questions are very fair and should be explored. But it's something that I would like to see us spend some time exploring and being and finding out about.
So then the last sort of a question, but I think it would be helpful to answer. The number of residents from the Donald Street area talked about the city annexing them. And I'm wondering, in terms of annexation of an area that's in the county, what is the process for that? Does the county have to agree to it, or what happens?
Well, clearly, if there's development proposed, let's say it's vacant land, a subdivider or a land developer would come to the city and ask for entitlements from us.
Maybe just like more specifically about Donald Street.
But if it's, okay, specifically,
Yeah.
okay.
Like in a neighborhood.
So in a neighborhood, LAFCO will be the ultimate body that would get to approve it. A reorganization, incorporation, disincorporation, annexation, de-annexation, those creation of special districts all go to LAFCO.
Okay.
So at some point there will need to be an application from the residents to take a request to LAFCO for them to act. It couldn't happen in a vacuum without the county being involved.
Well, but there's also, so the city would have to express some interest. You also, then there's also some studies. Typically, there's an economic analysis done because you were talking about shifting tax rates. And again, the Donaldson neighborhood being primarily residential, while the property tax comes over, it may not fully pay for the cost of services of what it costs for local government to provide services. That is typically what occurs. It may seem counterintuitive, but property tax does not pay for the full cost of city services. In other places I've worked where you have a commercial area that you're bringing in and you're annexing that, the city basically had to give some property tax back or give some money back to the county, so the county was kept whole for a period of time while they did not have that tax revenue anymore. So it is, there are other economic issues that have to be looked at as well. So it can be a complicated process.
Thanks, I think that's helpful. Sorry, we're not taking questions.
You didn't answer my question. I had a question regarding Marin County.
Oh, you know what? We're not going to answer questions about Marin County tonight. Sorry. This is not a time for public comment. I think that covers that portion of it. Before we start on council comments, we had questions during the presentation, but are there any additional questions?
I wanted to bring up San Francisco with
Is
the
it-
teacher housing.
Question?
So, yeah, how did they get that done? They put in $44 million to the project. They dedicated a portion of it to the teachers' aides, and then after that to teachers who live in San Francisco, and it was continued by Mayor London Breed. It was started with Mayor Lee. He said he was tired of the meandering and fruitless discussion for more than a decade. But there's now finally a fairly solid plan for teacher housing in San Francisco.
So, Councilmember Agrimonti, if you want to send us a link to that or something,
Yeah.
we can look into that. There are ways, like I know, for example, campuses, university campuses, like UC Davis, where I work for the city there, they had a project where they wanted to provide housing for professors.
And it may be on a school site.
Yes, so the land sometimes is owned by the educational institution. They contract with a developer who comes in and builds. Those houses are remain as dedicated, affordable units, and they can only be turned over to another professor, teacher. So there are ways to establish where you're doing it for your employees on your own land in some ways. So there are some unique things, and I know some public schools have been looking at some of that in the Bay Area too. So it'd be interesting to find out a little more.
Thank you. And I think, I'm sorry, it started because an employed teacher in the school district was homeless. And that's how that whole thing got started in San Francisco.
All right, and now on to council comments. Who would like to start? Vice Mayor Harvey?
I mean, I'm going to have other comments, but, one of the things that really kind of rang home for me was from Mr. Rocket, especially regarding climate change. I noticed as I was doing the preparations and study for this session that there is the ability to add a climate change element into the general plan. I think it's something that we should consider. I think that being an agricultural community with an extremely sensitive product, grapes grow in very temperate climates. As climate changes, this is going to create effects on our economy and basically how everything operates in this town. And so I think it's really, really important that we look at that issue seriously and consider adding that as an element to our general plan, so that as we develop, climate change is kind of part of that conversation and part of all new developments in the city of Sonoma.
Thanks. Anyone else? Councilmember Hundley?
So I know this is like all very general at this point, but with regard to the general plan, which I'm really excited about because it's such an interesting opportunity, we had discussed over time some of the initial homework and studies, one which was the economic study, which I am very interested in getting that information because I think it's information that we haven't had on hand, and it would help us think more about what our future is going to look like. But I look forward to how all of that progresses, and I think that it'll be probably another meeting before we have a clearer picture of what that might look like to begin with. For the urban growth boundary, I agree with, I think, all of the commenters that that needs to be renewed by the voters. I think it's I think it has certainly served its purpose, and we see now a lot of infill coming on. There are parts of it that I would like to take a closer look at. I think that the those couple comments to the effect of some controlled flexibility with regard to the affordable housing in certain circumstances, and we're sort of going on this housing path now, and perhaps a housing action plan, and kind of setting up our goals with that. And I just think it's a good time to consider, how could the urban growth boundary or an exemption, how could that be a part of our vision, recognizing, like most people have, that just simply extending the urban growth boundary is not going to meet our housing goals. So I think that there is a real opportunity there that I would like to discuss, and I think that it's it's almost a victim of its own success because the land in Sonoma has gotten so expensive that the city can't even afford it. So there's been projects in the past that will probably never happen again unless we get a bunch of money from the state. So it's a different world now, and I think we just need to really think hard about what our goals are and how we can make this city somewhere that families and young people can live in the future. Because looking at our city's mission statement, which we haven't really pulled this out that often, but a diverse community where residents and their children can and want to remain, I don't think that either of those things are currently true. So, but I look forward to having that conversation also, and I think it's just a matter of just re-examining some of the details and making sure they fit our goals.
Councilmember Cook?
Well, I agree with there was a lot of good questions tonight and a lot of good comments, and I'm excited about this. I think it's very important. I think one speaker summed up what's going to be very important here. It's called institutional knowledge, talking to the individuals that have been doing this and looking at it and why did they want to create this. There was a lot of good questions brought up, and I was glad to hear people not blame the housing crisis so much on just the UGB, because I think the UGB is something that we really need to take a look at that has been a great tool for Sonoma. I think I don't want to say forefathers, but our council members before this, made the right decision, and that's why we're here. But there is a disconnect when you do see, I do appreciate the people here from Donald Street, when you have First District with 67,000 people, when you have one person with a body of 4 others on the Board of Supervisors. Then you sit here and you look at the City Council, which you have 5, which if you do the math by people that live here, I represent 2,000, 2,000, 2,000, 2,000. And that's why we always talk about local control. I'm not here saying that we should split the first supervisional district, because I'm not going to say that. But I think that there is a point in time that we have to take a look. I would like to have this moment in time where the city of Sonoma does need to start going out and being that jurisdiction who does talk to the county. So this Donald Street, I live on Fano Lane, which is only 2 blocks away from Donald Street. And I think most people in this room probably live within a couple blocks, maybe let's say less than 5 or 6 blocks from the city limits. So all this affects us. Through this exercise, I would like to just have that be part of the discussion. I think it's very important. But as far as open space, I think we've done the right thing. Anybody that drives down and sees San Jose, Morgan Hill, Gilroy, you can't even tell the difference except for there's a little sign that just says you are entering and you're leaving. So I think it's going to be a great exercise, and that's my direction.
Thank you. Councilmember Agrimonti?
Yeah, thanks. So aside from this teacher housing, I'll give you that. But what I wanted to ask, I think I may have forgotten my thing. You might have to come back to me in a moment. Thank you.
got it.
Oh, I know. What Vice Mayor suggested about environment with respect to the goals that we have for the future. Well, Climate Action 2020, we were the first to sign on to it in Sonoma County. So there are really a lot of principles in that that probably would help as we move forward. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Harvey?
So with regards to the UGB, I think we need to have a continued discussion about it and about all elements of it. I think the question of we definitely need a UGB, we should keep it. We should definitely have a UGB. I think that there are huge benefits to it. I think it does put pressure on infill housing development, but I do have some concerns because I feel like when we start to propose what's been proposed here tonight by some of the commenters of 3-story buildings down West Napa Street and 20 units to an acre through that whole area, are we actually going to be able to achieve that goal? Is that something that everybody that came here tonight is going to come here then to support? Is that pressure really going to result in an increased density? And I think that is a big question, and to go out for a 30-year document is, if we don't build that density, then we are going to start running into some housing issues. I think we need to look at the affordable housing component and how that works is a question. If it truly is a bind, I don't really know. I'm kind of agnostic to that. I think there's some people that would say absolutely it's impossible to build affordable housing. One of the specific reasons is when it says there is no available land in the city, does that mean there's no available land that is cheap enough that you could build affordable housing on it? Or does that mean there's no land for sale? Or does that mean there's no open space, whether it's for sale or not? That's not a clear definition. And I think that we have to dig into these issues in a really deep way because we're developing a 30-year document. And I appreciate that this can go back out to the voters for a vote, but that's a huge process. And so I think I'd rather get it as close to right as we can the first time. As far as, the idea that if you build, and I would never support a huge expansion of UGB at all, but I think, this idea that you would not build affordable housing if you extended the UGB, we have an ordinance that would guarantee 20% of that would be affordable housing, but maybe that's not the right direction. Maybe we want to keep the UGB exactly where it is. I just think we need a broader conversation, so it's not something I'm willing to support 100% tonight. I support infill development. That's my priority, absolutely, but I want to make sure that we do build housing for the future. And one of the huge problems here is we have so much. If you drive down, East MacArthur, and you see all the housing that was built there that was once our affordable housing there. The west side, where my parents bought a home when they first moved here, was once all of our affordable housing. Now those homes are A lot of them are second homes. They're all going for $1.2 million plus. It's really changed this community, and so trying to find answers to that is really a question we have to ask ourselves. How do we find an answer to that? Is it expanding the UGB? I doubt that expanding it largely is gonna help us. I don't support that. I think that we need to keep the pressure on for infill housing, but we need to continue to have these conversations, and so I think we need to delve deeper into this and talk more about it as a council.
I'm sorry, I have one more last comment. I'm done.
Please.
I'm on a roll. The UGB, I do support. However, I guess in addition to that, I just wanted to understand how it has to do with infill, all of those things, and does it affect the UGB? And the other thing I want to know is how it began is very different than the discussions we're having here. I thought it was a one focus issue, how the UGB began, and as someone stated, it was in the tale of two valleys. So I think it would be important for us for this council and the public to understand how UGB got started. And I'm done.
Okay. So my comments are as follows. With regard to the general plan, I'm really interested, one, in the question of sort of our fidelity to our current general plan and where the variations have been and what our successes have been and why we have not done various elements. So I am interested in like the debrief of that in terms of planning for the future. I think overall, we actually have a great general plan, especially with regard to the development down Broadway, which I think we have really failed at promoting, and that would have solved a lot of our traffic congestion problems if we had actually developed commercial, residential over commercial down Broadway. That would be exciting, for example, which we haven't done very much of. So I think that's something. The other questions I have are practical questions. I had wanted this to be originally a joint session of the Planning Commission and the City Council because I think it's really important that we be grounded together on what we're doing, and I know there's going to be future opportunities for that, and now it sounds like we should also involve the CSEC, which is a lot of schedules to coordinate, but I really want to know, not at this moment, but in the near future, how will we work together and have some kind of clear ideas about what each role of each body is going to be. So I'm curious about that. I think a timeline is critical for getting anything done in life, and especially this, so I'd like to see some of that. I love a calendar. And then so I think this is a great overview, and I really appreciated the level of depth. I thought it was perfect for a first discussion about this, and I agree on the elements that having an environmental element is a great idea that I would like to see added as well. On the UGB, I absolutely support putting it on the ballot for sure. I don't know if that should be the March ballot or the November ballot, but that is something else. I think that however the final measure winds up, whether it's identical to what we have now or slightly different, that it requires additional community conversations, that this is just one, but that certainly we should have a meeting devoted solely to the UGB, not just an overview. So I think that's necessary and should happen soon. And I am really interested in having a tight timeline to figure out what would need to happen before the March or November ballots. What are the dates that we have to work back from so that we can have the appropriate amount of time to do the work we need? And I know we're a little bit under the gun on the UGB, but we have done a lot of other stuff this year. And I do think it's somewhat challenging to get our RENA numbers, like our new RENA numbers will be late, I guess, basically. It's very hard for us to plan without that information, and yet I suppose we have to. So I think that's a challenge we'll have to figure out. But And I also thought that comments from the members of the public were very helpful and informative as usual. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming and speaking tonight. So, I don't know if the staff wants to talk about next steps or.
I think for staff, what we want to do is really kind of step back and absorb the information that's come today, because there was a lot of good conversations from both community and council. We will need to, I keep using the word sequencing, but there's kind of like, what do we bite off first and how do we timeline and process that? So that's really part of what, I think as staff we want to focus on, and then also look at, there are, obviously the UGB is got a tight timeline. I agree with you, Mayor Harrington, and there's some things that we need to kind of lay that out. As council knows, there's also, we have to manage kind of our staff resources because we've also got the cannabis process and there's a lot of work to do there, plus just regular development pieces. So I want to be able to come back to you and kind of lay out some options and some sequencing. And it may be that we in the future want some kind of a subcommittee to kind of chew through that. And if we do, I'll ask for that at a next kind of meeting. But I think that we'll do some of our own kind of whiteboarding and then come back to you. So, but appreciate the feedback, and I want to thank David Storer and Colleen Ferguson did some work on this, and also Jeff Walterson for the team that helped put the package together for you tonight.
Great, and then I guess so that's for the UGB and the general plan. All right, great. Thank you. And with that, we will move on to item 6.2, which is discussion, direction, and possible action on the 7th Amendment to the Sonoma Garbage Collectors Contract for solid waste collection within the city and approval of resolution approving amendment and 2019 refuse rates.
I don't want to waste everybody's time, and I'd love to talk trash with you all, but I have to recuse myself from this just due to my current employment situation. So thank you.
Is that going to do it, Jeff?
Why don't you briefly describe what that is?
I work for Ecology Sonoma Marin. That's a waste management company that runs basically the almost all of Sonoma County, with the exclusion of Sonoma. So I think it's inappropriate for me to be commenting or questioning on this item, but I would love to talk individually with the group. I have some questions about. That's enough.
Bye.
Okay. I don't know how to do these things. We're learning. Sorry.
Okay.
Bye.
It's all good. All right, Mayor Harrington, members of the council, members of the audience. So we're here tonight to talk, and I'm recommending a kind of a 7th amendment to the garbage contract that we have with Sonoma Garbage Collectors. So a little bit of history. The city's contract with Sonoma Garbage Collectors since 1994. We currently have a long-term contract with them, and based on kind of state law, and the way this works is they are entitled to kind of quote a fair rate of return. So when we were putting the information together, and as for this year, some things came to light. So last year, you may remember, we did an update to the contract because there is a refuse rate index to methodology of how we set rates, and that rate index was always in Sonoma County's contracts, not in our contract. Well, when Sonoma County upgraded with Recology, they did things differently, and so part of the reason we came to you last year was we needed to create our own index and methodology. So we did that, and that was the agreement. And last year what we did is we said if the rates are under 6%, staff can approve those administratively. If they're over 6%, then not because it's legally required, but as a way to kind of put good transparency on, we talked about putting the rates through a Prop 218 process. And council knows from doing water rates, that's a fairly extensive process. That's putting a notice out and then setting a public hearing 45 days later, and then having that come. If people want to submit protest ballots, they do that, et cetera. So that's the Prop 218 process, not required for garbage rates, but we put it in as part of a transparency. So 2 things occurred this year with this contract. One, there are some what we're calling extraordinary circumstances, and Ken Wells, who represents Sonoma Garbage Collectors, is here and can speak to that. But as you all know, with the world of recycling, folks are no longer being paid for submitting their recycling. So the recycling still gets turned in and submitted, However, there is a loss of revenue of about $65,000 to Sonoma garbage collectors this year. In addition, there is new legislation and new requirements. And this is SB 1383 that basically establishes methane emissions and reduction targets. This is a statewide effort. There will be requirements both on cities and on our haulers. And the Cal Recycle has been working on these regulations. They're in kind of a second draft mode, and I know Mr. Wells has been involved in a group of Sonoma County that's commenting on all those regulations. So the regulations are still not out, but there definitely is going to need to be additional education, reporting, et cetera. And so with that comes additional cost. Because it's a whole new area. So based on this, Sonoma Garbage Collectors submitted for 2019 using the rate refuse index, a cost of a little over 6% for the typical, and then some additional funding and for the extraordinary circumstances, and that's broken down in your staff report. So based on those components, the total collection rate increase request was 9.5%. So one thing that looking at this issue is, when you hear percents, the question is, what is that percent on? And these percents are on fairly small, I would argue be modest kind of monthly or rates. So a 32-gallon garbage rate, which is what most folks have in our community, is $14.83 a month. With a 9.5% increase, that would go to $16.24. So a little less than a couple dollars, not a huge increase. 10%, almost 10% seems big, but the dollars are not. This is not a $5 or a $10 or a $20 swing. So as we kind of step back and talking, I've spent some time talking with Leslie Lucas, who runs Zero Waste, to try to understand a little more about SB 1383, and she's actually going to be coming and speaking to the Sonoma City managers. We're going to do some additional education. But clearly there's going to be some additional steps and additional requirements are going to be coming. So I see these kind of extraordinary circumstances potentially occurring again next year. So my recommendation is not only one, to create this language of extraordinary circumstances, because otherwise if you have a large loss in revenue or an increase in cost, our methodology doesn't cover it. So we need a way to cover that, and that's what these extraordinary circumstances would be. And then my recommendation to you is create 3 tiers. 1, stay with the old tier. If the rate increase is less than 6%, staff can move that forward administratively and improve it. If it's 6 to just under 10%, then Sonoma Garbage Collectors needs to come to the council in a public meeting, talk through the rates, and you all have the authority to say yay or nay, or set it lower, or et cetera. If it's over 10%, then we have Sonoma Garbage Collectors do the full Prop 218 process. So that's kind of a tiering based on something that we didn't foresee last year that we're recommending. So what's in front of you tonight is a resolution to approve a 7th contract amendment that would put in this extraordinary circumstance language of either loss of revenue or increase in costs outside of kind of routine business. And then basically, if you approve that, then you also are approving this 9.5%, because this is kind of an update for you at this time. And Sonoma Garbage would move forward with putting that rate increase on their next bills. So I'm happy to, there was a letter submitted from Ken Wells on behalf of the Sonoma Garbage Collectors, and it would probably be appropriate for, don't know if you want him to just speak under public comment, Mayor, if you'd like him to make a few comments now.
If you'd like to address us now, it's fine.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm Ken Wells, representing Sonoma Garbage, and I want to thank Kathy and the staff for helping us get to this point. I think Kathy covered everything in a good sort of overview, and I'd be happy to answer any particular questions or address anything specific that you might have questions about.
Oh, Councilmember Cook.
I guess I have a question. It probably has nothing to do with Sonoma Garbage, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around this recycling. Can you explain to me, This is kind of a general question. I have two cans. I have a garbage can and I have a recyclable can. What happens to the garbage, the recyclables?
The blue bin or
The blue bin, yeah.
those primarily, or for the most part, those are all collected and taken to Napa, to the Napa recycling program over there, the city of Napa runs.
And you don't get paid for that anymore? Is
Well,
that what I'm hearing?
So yeah, so diving into the weeds here, the details are that for many, many years, the collected aggregate value of those curbside recyclables, the bottles, the cans, the newspaper, have been taken to Napa, and we've been getting about $30 a ton. As of, and then I'll just a quick segue, you might have been reading in the newspaper, China has made a dramatic change in their markets and not allowing materials that had been going to China, mostly plastics and paper fiber. Those basically, that market has been shut down, which has driven the price of the value of the product down. So all that said is that now Napa is no longer paying us anything. We are allowed to deliver the recyclables. They will process them. They will send them to market, but we do not get any revenue from the sale of those or the disposition of those materials, because you can't even say they're sold anymore. We a little nervous about this because this is something that's going to take a while for the overall international markets to kind of reconcile, because China's been doing this for decades. In conversations with the representative at Napa, they're telling us that it's, in fact, what they told us last week was we are the only customer that delivers materials that they are not charging to take the materials.
Yeah, because I guess my question is, and this is not towards Sonoma Garbage, but this is a great platform to bring this up, because I've been screaming about this, because I'm for common sense, and this has no common sense, because when I go to Safeway and I get charged this, I mean, I'm probably, well, I guess I'm not the oldest one on the council, but I'm close to it. I remember going, and we would take our recyclables back. I think it was 5 or 10 cents a bottle, right, and we're being charged that. So I'm trying to figure out where the money's going, because I know that when I go to Safeway and I buy a 6-pack of 7-Up or whatever, I'm getting charged so much. And then if I throw it in that blue bin and it goes over there, so somebody's making a lot of money, or the price is going up there. I know it's not a Sonoma Garbage problem, but I just wanted to wrap my head around that.
I think the shortest or succinct way of describing it is that the value of those recyclables, that California redemption value, the CRV, that you're paying, is a tiny fraction of the cost of actually collecting it and getting it to market. So it's just a really, even though that value is there, it's not even close to what it costs to actually collect that material, come to your house every week, and get it to the markets.
Yeah, let's not talk too much about it. They'll be raising that up next.
Yeah. That's a short answer.
May I ask to that? And David, it's really interesting. Safeway does recycle. Yeah. They were, we had this dust up last year, but they actually are now recycling. It's not to the benefit of a customer. You have a limit of 50 cans, bottles that you can bring in, but they only give you back your CRV money.
Right.
It's not they don't weigh everything, where I think that's a benefit. But so they'll only accept that from you once a day. You can't just keep coming in 20 or 30 times to recycle. The other thing, of course, is much of the stuff that we put in bins are contaminated. And what does contaminated mean? It could be the lining of a pizza box is plastic. All of those things. So something, this is your business and the Corrado's business, but something's got to change. It's got to evolve somewhere. And, there are ideas moving around having mobile units that come around the county for CRVs, park in Safeway's parking lot and have a truck there. All these different things that are going on that are being researched right now by Leslie. And so these things are really helpful, but it's a no-win situation right now, especially for the garbage company. Unless you have that disposable income where you want to expand your research and development to find out what's more palatable for countries to take our stuff.
Through the mayor, just a quick comment. The California recycling, the redemption value is really a totally separate conversation than from the rates. It doesn't have really anything to do tonight, except it is in part of our world of trying to get discards into the right markets. I will, as I've mentioned to Council Member Agrimonti in our conversations at the waste agency meetings, the AB 2020 is the name of the state law that generated the redemption value that Council Member Cook mentioned. That has a real funding and an organizational dysfunctional system going on. It's pretty dysfunctional in Sacramento. And the only thing I can really say for you all as electeds is to talk to your electeds, talk to the Sacramento legislators, because they actually have the power to change that. The fact that we don't have redemption, and this is on my own personal comments here, not Sonoma Garbage, I'm really disappointed the fact that we don't have the 2020 centers, because that serves a significant part of our community that don't necessarily show up at these meetings. And I really feel it's important that they have that opportunity to redeem that value. Safeway in Sonoma is actually doing a special project. They're not doing that at all Safeways. They're doing it here because people have complained here. It is not a statewide Safeway situation. It's because Sonoma's actually complained to Safeway, and they're doing a little bit. We should have a community-wide, statewide solutions, and that's going to come from our state legislators. Pardon the soap opera, but that is really where the solution to that one lies.
Councilmember Hundley.
So, this is a little fantastical, but say suddenly a new market for these materials is found, and you can start, or the company can start making money again on dropping it off. Does that go into how would the rates? What would happen to the rates? Is there a similar mechanism to reconsider it because it was, I don't know.
If that occurs, we have conversations with city manager at the beginning of the process, and if we see those extraordinary circumstances, we'll bring it up to the city, and we would propose a lowering of our rates.
Yeah, and I think there are financial, Sonoma Garbage Collectors is required to submit their financials, I want to say by April
That's what I was referring to.
1, I can't remember the date. So those financials come through, we look at them. The other piece, I think, if there was that situation, and then, so maybe there's more money collected in 3 months and then it's not needed, then there could be a reduction in proration over the next year to do something like that. So again, it may not be even in the moment, but I believe it could be evened out.
I have a question. I just want to first recognize that our rates are substantially lower than the county and many other places. So even with a larger increase this year, it's still much lower than the county. So I recognize that. But I'm wondering why, just for the purposes of stability, is there some reason why rates can't be predicted for next year already? That the extraordinary rates, it's sort of like we are predicting there will be extraordinary circumstances and we know what they are, but we think there's no prediction of how much they'll cost, or why can't there be more stability forward going? And
to some extent, things are out of our control. The tipping fees at the landfill are given to us in April or late March, and that we basically have to integrate those. We're projecting there are going to be additional costs. I'm not sure that I could give you a number right now. There is the thought here that we are trying to provide a reasonable rate of increase over the next 3 years, rather than having 25 and 50 and 100% increases, which other cities have seen here. I think we're going to try to keep this at a reasonable rate so there isn't a shock. Personally, my rates from my 20-gallon can went from $13. I live in the city of Santa Rosa. Went from $13 a month to $25 a month in one step.
wow.
And that's a 20-gallon can, so that's a small one.
Now,
So,
and
for example,
what do you think of as reasonable? What does that mean? What's a range percentage-wise?
I think if we can keep it below 10% each year, I think that's a reasonable stepwise, especially when we're only talking like $15 a month. So we're talking $1.50 to $2 a year increase would be something I would say is not an outrageous increase. 100% would get my eyebrows going, but that's what we've seen in this county just last year. So we saw a lot of 100%. The value of the recycling, I can't predict that. I think from an economist perspective, In 3 or 4 years, as markets adjust to the fact that China is no longer buying these materials, we're going to see markets in California, I hope. That's jobs for California. I hope that that's what we see, because we haven't had that, we won't have that market that we've had. But that's just me forecasting. I can't give you a number on that, but it's a good question.
All right. I guess with that, maybe we'll open up to the public for public comment. Thank you very much. This is informative.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Bill Willers, 873 First Street West. It's just a general question, and it's about household batteries. I think they're basically the scourge of the earth, yet we all need them. And they're impossible to get rid of, quite honestly, in a convenient way. If you take them to a store that will take them back, you have to put a piece of tape on the bottom and the top. You have to separate them, put them in plastic bags. Can't be more than 2 in a bag. You create more waste than the product actually is. And what it essentially does is incentivizes throwing them away. I'd love to see the opportunity to somehow conveniently get rid of household batteries in our community, even if I drop them off at City Hall and they go to the Sonoma garbage guys. I think they deserve their rate increase. I appreciate their service, but I want that one thing getting to be taken care of. Thank you.
Good comment. It is difficult to get rid of batteries.
Hi again, Tom Conlon, 18850 Robinson. Well, it's hard to be standing in support of a rate increase for anything. However, in this matter, I have to agree that this is something we need to spend the money on. We all know that the recycling markets have collapsed, and we know that with SB 1383 on the horizon, our organic wastes do need to be diverted from the landfill. And I am very happy to see Corrado step up with this proposal, especially the 1%, roughly 1% additional increase to work on helping us with education and outreach. I will also reach back to them and try and find some ways to do that cost effectively, so we can really have maybe some volunteer support to make sure that we can be successful in increasing the diversion of organics from the landfill stream. So I support the measure. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? No? I'll close public comment, and if somebody has a motion.
Maybe just one point of information for a motion. I will tell you that as a consumer, Friedman's, I've been able to drop my household batteries off at Friedman's.
How? Just like in a bag?
In a bag. In a big bin.
And I also want to say, Mr. Willers, I dropped from the zero waste, I dropped off 50 pamphlets at City Hall, and they have all information on recycling. I don't know if it addresses the batteries, but they're there at the front desk.
Councilmember Cook.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I won't be doing the resolution because my computer is dead, but I do want to take this moment and say that I think we're very blessed here in Sonoma to have our own garbage company, and I appreciate how you come. I've been here for 6 years watching you come, and I love the fact, and I would hate to see a headline in the Index Tribune saying Corrado raised their rates 10% and the city council didn't say anything. But I think everybody knows here in Sonoma who you are and what the company stands for. And, you know, I stand 100% behind you. And I just want to thank you for coming here. And hopefully there'll be legislation to take care of this this whole issue, because I've been screaming about this for years. And as an elected official, I'm not a politician. I've always felt that I'm just elected by the people. If you look at what the plastic bag ban and all that, when we started here locally, I was all excited. Then it went regional, then it went statewide. They screwed that up. Then I went back to Safeway, and there's plastic bags. I lost how many engines in boats, or how many engines have been lost just because of the plastic bags in the bay, in our bay. I won't even go boating anymore because you know, there's just bags everywhere, and wells are end up with it. And here we are. It's amazing to me. We are such an environmental friendly society, and we talk the talk, But sometimes I just don't think that we walk the walk, and that has nothing to do with Sonoma garbage. It's our problem, and hopefully we can fix it. But thank you for coming here, and I know this is very difficult to ask for something like this, but it's well warranted.
So may I make a motion to introduce?
Please do.
I'd like to make a motion to introduce a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma approving the 7th contract amendment to the Sonoma Garbage Collectors Franchise Agreement, establishing solid waste collection rate review procedures and approving 2019 refuse rates.
I'll second that.
Can I have a roll call?
Councilmember Agrimonti,
Aye.
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Councilmember Hundley,
Aye.
Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries 4-1.
Thank you for coming. Now on to if did Councilmember Harvey leave? Does somebody want to grab him?
Stick around.
There he is. Oh.
You didn't go home?
Well, you got close session.
Oh.
Yeah. Would have been nice.
Oh. Our evening just got sadder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like those of us that have like personal lives that exist in our homes but not here. Anyway, okay. And with
My
that,
name's Amy and I have a life.
I tried to. Okay, council member reports and comments. Reports, comments. You people on the city council.
The Zero Waste did not have a meeting in July, so I don't have a report. I'm challenged by attending the Health Action Committee because someone has actually put. I'm going to go to the next one. I hope I don't embarrass the family. But evidently, some organization has taken over the goals of the city of Sonoma, and I'm going there to let them know. I don't even know where this came from.
Okay, thank you. Any other reports? None? How about city manager? Comments?
The only thing is city party this Thursday, 6 o'clock. Please come. Lots of fun, great music, food, and great community.
I forgot my announcement, which is August 5th is Jean Powell Day in the city of Sonoma. And for those of you who don't know who Jean Powell is, that makes sense because no one knew her last name until recently. And this is Jean from the Swiss, who everybody loves. And we will be celebrating her on August the 5th right here in City Council chambers. And I'm very excited about it. As I think we all are, and I'm really looking forward to that. So if you are interested in that, please come on August the 5th, 6 o'clock. City attorney? No comments. All right. And then do we just adjourn to closed session? Okay. And so now it's not on this agenda that I have here. That's why. So now we have, I don't have an agenda that has it on here, I don't think. Oh, here, this one it does. Different one. And now our item 10.1 is conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9, case Carla et al. Versus City of Sonoma and Sonoma City Council. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and we will retire to closed session.
Apparently I have to rededicate the meeting to Haley Parker, who I talked about at the beginning. Thank you, Madeline, for reminding me.